Okay, we are recording and we are streaming, so I will mute myself.
Okay. Pursuant to recently adopted amendments to the Illinois Open Meetings Act included in Public Act 101-0640, public bodies may in certain circumstances hold entirely virtual public meetings without a quorum physically present in any one location. On March 17th, 2020, I issued a declaration of emergency pursuant to the authority granted by the Village Code, the Illinois Municipal Code, and the Illinois Emergency Management Agency Act to address the health threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. On June 15th, 2020, I executed a written determination that given the ongoing emergency associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, in-person meetings of the Village Board of the Trustees are not practical or prudent at this time until further notice. On June 26, 2020, Governor Pritzker issued a new disaster proclamation and executive order 2020-43. That declared in-person attendance at public meetings of more than 50 people at the regular public meeting location to be impractical in accordance with the Open Meetings Act as amended by Public Act 101-0640. In accordance with the governor's disaster proclamation, my declaration of emergency and my recent determination regarding meetings of the Village Board of Trustees, I am, as of now, as president of the Village of Glencoe, hereby renewing my determination that in-person meetings of the Board of Trustees are not practical or prudent at this time until further notice. Accordingly, this Committee of the Whole is being conducted virtually, with members participating through the Zoom webinar platform. Village Manager Corrali is in the boardroom at Village Hall as required by the Open Meetings Act. May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax.
Here.
Trustee Listner.
Here.
Trustee Miller.
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Here.
Trustee Rubin.
Here.
Trustee Vree. And President Levin.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. As noted, today's Village Board meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting via Zoom webinar, and that includes this Committee of the Whole meeting, and is being audio recorded and simulcast on the Village's Facebook page in compliance with state law, and as the Village continues to support social distancing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. To help facilitate this meeting, I ask each member of the Village Board and staff to mute your lines if you are not speaking and unmute your lines when you speak. This helps to minimize background noise. Members of the public are muted and should remain muted during the meeting. Members of the public should not share their videos. In accordance with the supplemental rules the board approved on April 16th, 2020, here is how public comment will be taken at this meeting. The email address and telephone number designated for public comment for this meeting were published with the minutes, or I should say with the agenda for this meeting. In a moment, I will ask Management Analyst Deputy Clerk Jordan Lister to read the public comments that were submitted prior to the meeting in compliance with the instructions that were previously published with the meeting materials. If a member of the public would like to submit a public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to Glencoe Meeting, singular, at villageofglencoe.org. Comments submitted during the meeting may be read at the end of the meeting. Written comments should be limited to 400 words. Analyst Lister, were there any comments received before the meeting?
Good evening, President Levin. This is Management Analyst Jordan Luster. We did not receive any public comments for the Committee of the Whole meeting prior to the start of the meeting.
Thank you. Megan Olson, are you re-hooked in so we can proceed with that item?
President Levin, I think she's having some technical difficulties. So if it's all right, maybe we could move to the next item relative to the tree preservation ordinance.
Yep. The first item then that we're going to take up tonight is discussion of Chapter 34 of the Glencoe Village Code regarding the village's tree preservation ordinance. And I would ask Public Works Director Dave Mao to fill us in on that. Dave?
Certainly. Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. You've got the packet of material that was sent out, and so we're just going to touch on a few highlights and then hopefully just have some dialogue with you on some of our observations and a recommendation going forward. The village's tree preservation ordinance was adopted 20 years ago in 2000, and it was introduced into Chapter 34 of the Village Code. It's been revised a couple of times, minor changes, but the intent, the primary purpose is still as it was originally adopted, and that was to balance the protection of the forested character and the natural resources of the village with the rights of private property landowners. In short, the ordinance requires a permit for any tree on public or private property that is 8 inches in diameter or greater for the removal of a healthy tree. And the ordinance does contemplate, and so dead, diseased, and hazard trees can be removed with a no-fee permit. Over these first 20 years of the ordinance, I think from staff's perspective, it's been generally effective in preventing the unnecessary removal of mature trees from front yards of existing properties, and as well as managing tree removal for for single-family redevelopment sites. The ordinance does have a fee component, so otherwise healthy trees 8 inches in diameter or larger are assessed a replacement escrow deposit fee amount per inch based on the type of tree, not necessarily the quality. The current fee for that is $175 per caliper inch, and that replacement fee is doubled if that tree is in a select group of what we call heritage trees, which are generally hardwood trees, includes some native tree species for northeastern Illinois, but it's a lot of, and you've got the brochure that's been developed in recent years, that the handout that we use in talking to not only residents but development, and explains the ordinance in simplified form and the cost breakdown. I would note that the ordinance, there is no requirement to replant trees. That question's been raised by neighbors of properties where trees have been removed. Only that a tree escrow deposit is paid for as part of the permit for removal. If that deposit is returned on an inch-for-inch basis based on qualifying trees, either the net of the trees planted and the dollar value, if there's a net balance, or in very few cases, but in some cases, or if it's all forfeited, it's surrendered to the village and goes into a tree fund in the general fund, an escrow deposit fund that can be used for all of our forestry division practices. So some some new plantings. We've used it for treatment of existing elms and ash trees. We have an ongoing treatment program to maintain some of the existing tree canopy and the tree harvest in the public way. One of the rationale for putting this on the agenda tonight, we wanted to at least update you on if you weren't familiar on the provisions in the current code, but also discuss some occurrences many times in recent years where we've seen the need to have more authority in the ordinance regarding the removal of hazard and diseased and dead trees. Currently, the code only addresses and mandates tree removal for trees afflicted with Dutch elm disease. And there's a process where we have the ability to notice authority and ability to notice a property owner to remove a diseased elm tree within a prescribed time period at their expense. And if they're unresponsive in that time period, and we've gone through our due diligence on notice, the village has the authority to remove that tree via a contractor and transfer any of those costs to the property owner. The DED issue, was, first came on the scene in the 70s in this state, in this part of the country. But as you're probably aware, even if you're not an arborist, there's a rash and a steady string of tree diseases that appear. Some get a lot of publicity and notoriety. Some are very quiet. But most recently, you probably heard the emerald ash borer and its impact on Cook County beginning in the mid 2000s. Dead or diseased trees on private property can become a hazard to neighboring properties and the general public, depending on where they're located. We field numerous calls every week, particularly between spring and fall, from neighbors of property concerned about dead trees on an adjoining property. Interestingly, we seldom, if ever, get a call with concerns about dead trees from the property owner themselves. The ordinance, as presently written, does have a provision in there for us to determine and take action for dead limbs that are overhanging the public way, but not it's silent to dead trees in their entirety. And the inability for the village staff to be able to require property owners to remove hazardous, dead, and diseased trees has become a challenge, and it has been for many years. Many of our surrounding neighboring communities have provisions in their code that give the village manager or a designee authority to request the removal of hazard trees. Highland Park, Northbrook, for example, Northfield, and with a similar due process, and the end result is our provision for Dutch elm diseased trees. So this is being brought forward tonight. Staff believes that if the board's in agreement, that we would recommend the opportunity to work with the village attorney's office to draft appropriate amendment to the ordinance and bring it back to the board for review and consideration. And I know there are other elements that may be of interest or questions in our tree ordinance, and we're prepared to discuss those tonight. I also have General Superintendent Don Kirk has joined us tonight for a couple of our agenda items and can speak at least operationally to our management of the tree ordinance. We have a couple of certified arborists on staff. One is our forestry supervisor, and one is one or two of them are our operational staff on the tree crew that does the pruning and trimming and removal on the village's tree stock. So with that, I would open it up to questions and comments, and we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, let me go down and ask each of our trustees for their thoughts or comments or questions. Joe, let's start with you. Do you have any questions for Dave?
No, just a comment. My father lives in Oak Forest, which had that ash disease that destroyed the whole town. So I'm well aware of what's happened in Cook County and understand that if not treated, we could suffer something fairly potentially similar. So he literally took a town and there wasn't a tree left in it. So, but no further questions. Thank you, Dave, for the color.
Gail, any questions or thoughts?
I definitely think it makes a lot of sense to look back at the ordinance, given the need to really get that authority to remove dead, diseased, or hazardous trees. So I would definitely be in favor of that. Just as a side question, I was curious how the tree removal fee had changed over the years. You mentioned it was $175 a caliper inch currently. I didn't know if that has changed over the years or been a flat fee.
Or should be changed now?
You know, that's only the second iteration. I think when it first came out, trustee listener, when we first said it, it might have been 100 and a quarter, but it's been at the present 175 for non-heritage trees and double that, $350 an inch for heritage trees for probably the last 8 or 10 years.
Okay, so I just thought if you're looking at the ordinance, if that is something to also just since, you know, the CPI has moved up during that same time period, that might be something to think about. That's all
Sure.
I have to comment about.
Thank you, Gail. Barbara, do you have any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, it seems like a good idea. It was thank you, David. It was a very thorough presentation. I guess my only question is there any downside to enhancing our ability to be able to get rid of diseased and potentially dangerous trees? What could be the downside?
Dave, can you think of any downside?
Well, we're not going to necessarily make friends out in the community if we come in with direction, you know, to remove trees. But I think it's worth noting that that any dead tree on a property doesn't necessarily become a hazard, and it's really more location and condition and proximity both to the property owner themselves and neighboring properties where we most often hear it is trees that abut a property line with concern about, you know, if that tree were to go down, you know, where's it going to fall, and is it going to cause damage to a structure, or trees that are out close to the public right of way but still on private property. That being said, I mean, there's nothing in our experience. We've seen dead trees stand on sites in town for 20 years, and it just because it's dead doesn't necessarily mean it's at risk of evident failure. But and we've also, as we all have seen, given the right storm condition, we've seen otherwise healthy trees and spruce trees in particular, you know, be completely uprooted. So, you know, some of that is hard to take preventative action on. We think this is a fairly natural one, and one that we would take seriously and not necessarily wouldn't address with a broad brush that every dead tree is a hazard either.
Okay, thank you. I would be in favor of this. It sounds like it's being done in a careful way with you know, looking out for the rights of homeowners who might be just fine with their dead tree as long as it's not presenting a hazard.
Peter, any comments or thoughts or questions?
I do, yes, thank you. I've got some comments and thoughts and questions. Luckily for you guys, I'll probably forget half of them. But I think that trees are extremely important, and I don't have any concern with what's proposed, although I think if we're going to look at our tree ordinances, we ought to do it comprehensively and holistically. For one, I think that we ought to make sure whatever ordinances we have support and promote our objectives around maintaining and managing a tree canopy. So I would like to make sure that whatever we're doing is encouraging our objectives with trees on the whole. We're talking about removing trees from the private property. Those replacements that we would be doing would be in the public property. And when you think about that and the distribution of the potential tree canopy, it becomes significant. Let's not forget trees offer shading in the summertime to lower bills. It offers windbreak in the wintertime to reduce your heating costs. It provides aesthetic beauty, which promotes mental health, which reduces depression, which raises everybody's joy of living in Glencoe. So these trees are not insignificant. They have a tremendous amount of value. Even dead ones are important habitat for different types of bird species. Now, I'm not suggesting that take priority over any public health or risk to property. All I'm trying to do here is suggest that let's look at this holistically and consider whether or not we want to have incentives for people to not cut down trees on private property, and if that can be rolled into this practice. Maybe we want incentives to have people keep their trees, their high value trees, and stronger disincentive to take them down. I'm not talking about, in this case, the ones that pose a risk, but again, looking at our overall objectives for Glencoe and trees. We may not have another chance as a board to think about trees for who knows how long. We've got a lot of things to address. Trees are on our topic today, so maybe we ought to step back and take a bigger, wider perspective. I forget what the heck I was going to say, but I did have some questions. Like one of them is if somebody is required to take down a tree, does it matter? Does it matter to the fees and what they would be paying if it's a live or dead tree? Let's say I wanted to develop a property and I wanted to take down a big old dead heritage tree. If it's dead or alive, does it matter?
Yeah, it's a good question. The ordinance as it's written allows the removal, requires a permit for any tree larger than 8 inches. Those trees that are dead, there's no fee attached to that removal. If it's a live tree, again, based on whether it's a heritage or non-heritage, then that fee, escrow fee, is collected and held onto. I would note though, every tree removal permit requires an application, and every single application is field reviewed by the village's forestry supervisor. And in many cases, when the ordinance talks about the requirement it was crafted in a way that kind of addresses the front yard, front and side yards differently than the backyard of private property. So there's different priorities assigned. The highest priority is the public way, and we just, on very few occasions have we ever permitted the removal of trees on the public way. And when we have, it's either been with a requirement to spade and move the tree or replace it with a much larger diameter than just a nominal 2-inch. But on private property, the front yards are treated a little bit differently than the backyards. This was the way the ordinance was when it was crafted, trying to balance, again, private property rights. But tree impact activity is what's supposed to trigger it. So, you know, the fact that if I've got we dealt with one over the last year with a property that wants to remove a 36-inch oak from the front yard, and the justification is it's too close to the house and it's causing it has structural impact on our stairs, et cetera, et cetera. And in our opinion, and we've looked at it in a number of different directions, that's not merited. That's not what's happening out there. It's an excuse to try to have this tree removed, and so that permit's been denied. Now the ordinance has an appeal process. for a decision of the forestry supervisor, who essentially is a designee of the manager, and that can be appealed to the village manager, but it doesn't go any further than that. So we do, you know, just to drive that point home, and that's a good point, Pete, that every request for a removal of a live tree is not permit is not granted necessarily. So we have some of that's done through good forestry practice, counseling, education, encouragement to consider alternatives if it's potentially an impact with a driveway or some other hardscape. We've had pretty good success explaining, because a lot of cases it's just a lack of understanding of how work will impact trees and how it won't.
So that's interesting to me, David. Thank you for the explanation. And I'm glad to hear that you guys take this seriously. It's not a blanket approval. It's important that we maintain this tree canopy. I wonder if that indicates you should have better support in the ordinance to help you make these arguments, or to make the gray areas, such as potential damage to structures, more clear. That I don't know, but perhaps there's language that can be crafted just to help you with those discussions.
Yeah, we certainly can look at that and look at examples of. We've been studying the existing ordinances on some of our neighboring communities, and there may be additional detail we can draw from those.
So I'd like to suggest a few things to consider. I just forgot the first one. The second one was this idea of tying any kind of tree removal to the overall canopy. So what's important is managing the total canopy. And if there are areas of town that are more or less densely populated with trees, we may want to consider a strategy, something thoughtful from our forestry department, about either filling gaps or not getting too crowded, whatever the right canopy cover percentage should be.
Pete, are you referring to in the public right of way or in private property, or both?
I think for Glencoe, public or private. So I want for those who haven't thought about it, the permit fees, as David shared with us, go to essentially what I would say is earmarked for forestry. But may or may not be spent on new trees. But part of the problem is, in terms of planting new trees, we've been putting them in our open spaces. And some of you may recall a comment, I certainly recall a comment a few years ago from a resident who was talking about the lack of open space to actually use the open space. It's so full of trees that he can't toss his frisbee or toss a ball with his kid because he's has to throw curveballs every time. And as a result, and I think that's partly a result of us having this fund to plant trees and we're moving them all into our open space because that's what's available to us in the public sector. And as a result, those areas are basically filled up, maybe too full to some people's perspective. And then what do you do with this extra money? I don't imagine there's a shortfall, but I think we should be thinking about this in terms of the larger impact. And if you can imagine, there was the issue where, hey, everybody wanted to get rid of their trees because they want to build bigger homes in Glencoe. Well, the tree canopy is significantly impacted because we don't have those trees on the private properties. They'll be pushed only into the strips of the right-of-way. And again, that is a challenge if you're trying to manage a total canopy. So I'm going to stop because I feel like I'm taking too much time, but my thoughts are that we give this some, I don't mind the provisions suggested here in the short term, but I also think if we've got people looking at tree ordinances and preservation, it ought to be done holistically.
Just one note, Pete, that if you look at the brochure, I mean, canopy trees are our largest group, and that's our focus, to replace tree removal species largely with canopy trees. You get a much different impact than And so hence, you know, there's less incentive for spruce trees and even multi-stem trees, which are not canopy trees. And so that indirectly is in response to that same incentive, if you will. They're getting more credit for putting those canopy, replanting canopy trees as opposed to anything else.
That does remind me, I had comments on your brochure, but I feel like I've taken my time. We can talk another time.
You'd note there's no ginkgo tree on the brochure any
I
longer.
did notice that, of course. Yeah, that's great. There should not be any ginkgo trees in Glencoe either, but that's another issue.
Well, I've got a retired forestry arborist that would probably disagree with you, but that's a
I know.
conversation for another day.
Yeah, happy to duke it out later.
Thank you, Peter. And you should feel free to take up the other comments after today, because I think they're all very valuable. Gary?
First of all, just in general, I'm in support of the original premise of having an ordinance that gives the village the power to take down hazardous trees, as opposed to just rely on the goodwill of a particular neighbor. And I say that as somebody that had a tree, very, very large tree, fall on our property that was right next to our property. Fortunately, no one was hurt. But I also agree very strongly, actually, with Peter and Gail's thought about raising the fee is, of course, one element of what might be done in terms of a more comprehensive ordinance to try to promote more trees and replacement of trees and how we do it. Now, at that point, I'm not an arborist. I don't have the knowledge that Peter does about the topic, but I think those ideas are important for our community. And I don't know to what extent we could go so far, for example, on new builds, where you get more of the trees taken down and people just say, well, I'm entitled to take them down. I just have to write the check. It's part of the cost of the house. And so be it. Or at least I think that's the prevailing attitude, with saying, yes, but to the extent there is space on your land where we think you could plant a tree and it's not, over a giant water reservoir tank to deal with the runoff issues of having more area paved over than was before, things like that, where it would be safe to do so, that perhaps we can say, in point of fact, you have to plant trees, more, a tree or trees as replacements on your property. I don't know if that goes too far or not. I don't know if that's too complex or not, but I do think that we ought to consider what our neighboring communities have to further promote not losing quite so many trees to the new builds as we have been.
Thank you, Gary. Let me sort of summarize so that you all have the idea of what we should do going forward from the standpoint of what I hear us as a board saying. One, we do fully agree that we should be looking at and reviewing in light not only of the current policy, but any new policy that gets adopted into the tree code, the various fees and how we encourage heritage and all that. So I think we're recommending, once we figured out everything to go in, to take a good look at that and make it realistic and perhaps have a mechanism for increasing it when needed that we actually review and think about. Also, I think we have expressed a strong belief that the village should have the authority to require tree removal under the circumstances we were discussing. And that should, we think, involve a little broader to allow the village to also require trimming or dealing with diseased trees, and make sure that we've looked at the broad perspective of how to give the village the authority it needs. And lastly, I think that we really are trying to look at how does this help us maintain our green canopy, et cetera. And as you review and work on this, if there are ideas or other things that need to be included in it in order to promote those policies and sustainability. We would hope that the staff will be able to include ideas that involve that in any suggested revision of the code. Does everybody feel that that adequately summarizes what our thoughts were? Not hearing it. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I see that we have Megan back. So let's return to what was item 3, discussion of recommendations from the village staff regarding pursuing EcoDistrict certification. Megan, can you fill us in on that?
Megan, you're muted.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, Megan.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So in early 2019, the STF was searching for a community-based framework to guide the village and its sister organization's sustainability efforts. After several months of debate and research, the Sustainability Task Force chose Ecodistricts protocol. At the June 2019 Committee of the Whole, the STF and the staff liaison, Adam Hall, recommended Ecodistricts to the village for implementation. At that time, the village board trustees directed staff to further research the amount of effort and resources needed to plan and implement the Ecodistricts protocol, as well as to achieve certification. Sharon, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So our research of Ecodistricts included a deeper look at the certification process laid out in the protocol. We also looked at other registered Ecodistrict community profiles and their approaches to the Ecodistricts certification, which we will discuss shortly. We also spoke to internal staff as well as our planning consultant. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So first, I want to start by reviewing what Ecodistricts is, starting with a little bit of confusing terminology. When we say Ecodistricts, we could be referring to 3 different things: a concept, a community, or an organization. Ecodistricts as a concept is an urban planning model that integrates ecologically sound practices with sustainable community development. The Ecodistrict concept is a fluid idea which could be interpreted in many different ways. An Ecodistrict community is a community that is committed to the Ecodistricts concept. Lastly, we have the Ecodistricts as an organization. This organization is based out of Portland, Oregon, and was formed in 2012. The organization was established to guide Ecodistrict communities through their planning and implementation processes. The Ecodistricts organization created the protocol. The protocol is a framework that lays out an Ecodistrict concept planning process, which includes a vision and a set of goals, as well as recommended non-prescriptive objectives, strategies, and performance indicators. The vision of Ecodistricts protocol includes climate protection, equity, and resilience. These are principles that the STF feel are particularly appropriate and vital in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the current social unrest. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what exactly does the protocol include? The protocol planning process includes the completion of 3 documents, starting with the imperatives commitment, which is the community's pledge to the vision of Ecodistricts, namely the climate protection, equity, and resilience. The second document is the declaration of collaboration, which names the background organization. The backbone organization is responsible for the protocol, roadmap, and implementation process. The third document, the roadmap, establishes baselines and outlines strategies and performance indicators for the visions and the goals laid out in the first document. Each of these documents require extensive community engagement, cross-organizational and intergovernmental collaboration, as well as strong public-private partnerships. The planning process is designed to take 3 years to complete, and it can be certified by the Ecodistricts organization. To maintain certification, an Ecodistrict community must submit a performance report on progress every 2 years. We could go to the next slide, please. So, what sorts of communities are pursuing Ecodistricts communication? You can't see them all on this map, but there are 17 communities pursuing Ecodistricts across the country. Generally, the Ecodistrict communities are mixed-use neighborhoods that are less than 1 square mile in size and are located in large metropolitan areas, such as San Diego, Portland, Seattle, and the Twin Cities. Since Ecodistricts began offering certification in 2017, 2 communities have achieved certification, and 1 other community has submitted their imperatives document. If we could go to the next slide, please. So, how are the Ecodistrict communities organizing themselves? A backbone organization refers to the organization that is in charge of overseeing the roadmap document and the implementation process. Among the 17 Ecodistrict communities, most are led by community development organizations and usually have strong public-private partnerships. Most of these community development organizations have obtained a 501c3 designation and have had annual revenues ranging from $200,000 to $2.4 million. That was in 2018. None of the registered Ecodistrict communities are led by municipalities. However, municipal bodies have been important in implementing the process and initiating the process. If we could go to the next slide, please. How are the backbone organizations facilitating the planning process? Of the 3 communities that have completed at least one of the planning documents, all have relied on an outside consultant to complete the work. We did speak with the Ecodistrict's organizational staff, and they said the Ecodistrict certification is intense and rigorous. It is both advantageous and efficient to have a consultant to do the heavy lifting. The Ecodistrict staff believed that it could be finished in-house by trained and knowledgeable staff who could make a commitment on a daily basis to a multi-year planning process. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you, Sharon. So one example of a community that has achieved Ecodistrict certification is the borough of Edna in Pennsylvania. They were the first community to achieve certification back in December of 2019. This community is comprised of 3,500 people and covers 0.8 square miles. The certification process was led by the Edna Community Organization, which was established by the Edna Economic Development Corporation for the sole purpose of incubating, facilitating, and stewarding Edna Ecodistrict work. It has 1 full-time staff member and was funded by a Pittsburgh area grant. The Edna Community Organization worked with a local planning consultant to facilitate its planning process, which included over 30 community engagement meetings. Could we go to the next slide, please? So, After we've completed this research, Ecodistricts was discussed by the Sustainability Task Force, and we decided that seeking certification was not appropriate at this time due to the financial uncertainties. The STF is recommending that the village continue to communicate with the community agencies about ecodistricts and recommends the incorporation of ecodistrict principles such as equity, resilience, and climate protection in future village planning processes. If we could go to the next slide, please. We also talked to Taylor Baxter, our services manager, and he thought at this time that it was a little premature to be seeking certification with the comprehensive planning process that needs to be starting. So with that, I think we're ready for discussion.
All right, let me start with Joe. Joe, do you have any questions on the presentation or comments?
My comment would be that's great research by the staff. I agree that with only 17 current ecodistrict communities, there's a commitment from staff and costs that I would say I believe it's right to pause. I think that Glencoe can learn from the tenants that the ecodistrict supports and continue to working towards being a premier sustainable community. I like the idea of a public-private partnership or a grant to help facilitate, but I think it'd be risky if we were the first municipality to take this on solo.
Thank you, Joe. Gail, any thoughts?
I do agree with Joe. I agree with staff, and that was an excellent presentation. And I agree that using their principles as guidelines as we move forward is certainly a good idea. But this sounds like something so rigorous, so difficult, and possibly so premature at this point that I would agree with the Sustainability Task Force recommendation.
Okay, Barbara?
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. And I would just add that I think we're lucky in that we have some great resources in our community. I think we're probably better situated than many communities to be able to keep learning about this and incorporate it into our planning process. I think the timing on this is good because I do think that shortly we will get going on the next phase of the 20-year plan. It's probably been 25 years at this point. And one of the things that I think we need to work on is how to marry the ideas and enthusiasm of the Sustainability Task Force with the Plan Commission. Perhaps other people have been thinking about how that could be done. But the Plan Commission is the body that works on the plan, and these ideas and then the work behind them has been generated by the Sustainability Task Force. So I look forward to conversations about that as well.
Thank you, Barbara. Peter?
Yeah, so I'm a little disappointed that we don't have more enthusiasm for adopting the plan or moving towards the plan more actively. This sounds like a pretty passive perspective. I want to let people know that, while the comments made that a municipality hasn't been the backbone organization, we were not suggesting that the municipality be the backbone organization, but rather we find the appropriate backbone organization to move this forward. We were not suggesting necessarily that it be the Village of Glencoe's, us governance. And I also worry a little bit that we very often look to the precedents as opposed to having the courage and being bold enough to establish our own path. And one of the reasons we chose Ecodistrict is because it allows you to be very much choosing your own path in a bold and new and fresh way, bringing that to a planning process, which quite frankly is a little bit, sometimes can be a little bit old school. And bringing issues, and I don't mean any offense to the Planning Commission whatsoever, but I think that there are concepts such as planning for social, climate, and resilience issues is often not included in major projects such as a land use plan. So this is a comprehensive, integrated perspective. And I worry when we so often say, well, what do our neighbors do? When we really ought to have a much more, first off, global perspective, and second off, our own darn ideas about what we can be, and not be limited by other people's perspectives and approach. The Ecodistrict plan provides us some structure to do that. And so I feel personally a little disappointed. And I suspect that we'll move forward with a variety of new plans and perhaps take some bits and pieces of Ecodistrict. But I think that somewhat misses the point of trying to be more holistic and forward-thinking. An Ecodistrict plan, were we to have launched on this a few years ago, we would have been much better prepared for COVID. We would have been much better prepared for the Hoover estate. And I think the community would be in a much better position to manage social issues. So I think it's critical that we continue to consider this type of thinking. And I hope that we can come around to recognize what this can do for us in the community.
Thank you, Peter. Gary?
I think unfortunately the timing certainly is not good, given what's placed upon our staff currently, and the economics, if there are any, to the village in terms of supporting this right now. So maybe it's the wrong time. I agree with a number of the other speakers in terms of the fact that I'm sure we will incorporate any number, and as we already do, in terms of, you know, when we see proposals, when we see materials from the village, you know, it cites, this is part, by the way, this relates to sustainability, this relates to this goal, this relates to that goal, that we already think about these things quite actively as we're managing the day-to-day affairs of the village. And, you know, this reemphasizes that, and I think we should take that to heart, as others have said, including Peter, although obviously Peter feels that we should be far more proactive about it, which is a good goal. But I don't think we should pursue this particular idea at this time in terms of actually getting certification. I think we focus more on the substance of what this leads to in our community, in our planning processes and other discussions that we'll be having about other topics, as opposed to necessarily focusing on and paying someone to help us get certified by a third party that we have succeeded. I think we can have accountability amongst ourselves without having to look to a third party organization. So, but I do think the goals are good.
Thank you, Gary. Let me see if I can summarize some of the concepts that I believe that we as a board are trying to convey to staff. One of the first concepts that I think we're all saying is that we think the principles and concepts of looking at eco-districts, what you look at when you're trying to figure out how to achieve it, are very useful principles in looking at a whole variety of things that the village approaches, including development, etc. And so it would be helpful, I think, if we could have, as our staff does its planning going into future years, staff take a look at how to apply these principles and what their effect is on the various parts of the budget and of what we're trying to accomplish, so that we really do incorporate the Ecodistrict planning principles into our planning. Secondly, I think sometime after May of next year is an appropriate time for us to once again, as a board, look at our strategic planning process and applying the ideas and concepts of this in and integrating them into how we look at what is the next step in the strategic planning would be a good thing for staff to be looking at how to incorporate it. And growing out of all that is the idea of having our sustainability committee looking at those concepts and beginning to think of where can we have strategic partners that may be outside the village work with us on a variety of implementation concepts for various principles that are put forth in the Ecodistrict certification. And that would require staff and working with Peter and the committee to focus a little bit more directly on that aspect of next steps. So I think what I take away from all of our comments is that those are ideas and thoughts that we want the staff to look at in order to continue moving down this path that can lead to good developments for the future. Does the board think that that helps to maybe make a little more concrete what we're suggesting to staff going forward? Barbara.
Thank you, President Levin. I would like to add one thing to that in my request to staff, which is to work on how we can meld the work in this regard with between the Sustainability Task Force and the Plan Commission. I think that it would strengthen these ideas and our ability to promulgate them if we have the Planning Commission involved. And I think these are good ideas, and if you get people from various walks of life in the community, which the Planning Commission has, involved and excited, that gives it more juice. So I would like to add that to it. Otherwise, I mean, frankly, I'm a little confused about how this all could work.
Well, one aspect of it, Barbara, because we have coming up for the Plan Commission very shortly, they're redoing, since they've finished the downtown part, they're going in and looking at the rest of Glencoe. So when I was expressing our desire that they incorporate this concepts into strategic planning and work with the Sustainability Task Force, I think an important part of that was focusing on the idea that staff come back to us and talk about what it is we can do with the Plan Commission so as they embark on this new, very important piece of their work, take into account these principles. And so I envision that meaning that both Sustainability and Plan Commission will both be very much involved in carrying the concepts forward, if that's helpful.
Okay, yes, thank you.
And
One other comment, I just wanted to give a shout out to Megan. Megan, thank you. That was not an easy thing to explain. And I thought you had a very good narrative. So I appreciate that. That was well done.
Thank you.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the recommendation was to open or continue the dialogue with our sister agencies around this idea.
Right.
I think part of the recommendation is that and I think the Sustainability Task Force and others are willing to open up this discussion with the parks and the library and et cetera. Yes.
And I would say, Peter, that it is a compliment to you that staff and Megan are able to help translate all this into things that us poor members of the board who aren't as familiar with it all can understand. So I thank you for all your work in the area.
Well, thanks, but that was all Megan. She got it. She dug in and got it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and any other thoughts, gang? Or shall we move on? All right. Our next order of business is discussion of the village's sidewalk snow removal program, which seems to me very important in eco matters to figure out how do we handle the snow when it comes. So on that, I would respectfully ask Dave and Don if they will go over and tell us what we need to know about the sidewalks snow removal program and the equipment, etc.
Certainly, the board has the staff memo in their packet, and that we won't go through that line by line. But as village president indicated, we are joined tonight by our superintendent Don Kirk, who's in the war room and prepared to talk about the village's snowplow program from an operational standpoint. You know, we have within the structure of our snow and ice control operations program is sidewalk snow removal, and that includes nearly 60 miles of residential and business district sidewalk. The way that's outlined in our operational plan is that in simple terms is we don't have the manpower to move to sidewalks immediately, so that will be initiated after we have the street system in control. And so oftentimes that's in a typical 12-hour shift for snow removal. It might be anywhere from 8 to 24 hours after a snowfall event has ended. I would also note that we only initiate sidewalk snow removal efforts for snowfall events greater than 2 inches for a number of reasons. It's hard on the infrastructure. In addition to adding to our operational load, it's hard on the infrastructure. Oftentimes we'll create more damage if we're plowing minor amounts of snow. Our sidewalk snow removal plan is relatively simple. It's split into a number of areas, and those are done. And within those areas are different 2 levels of different priority. The methodology for snow removal varies based on the depth and the type of snow, but it's primarily two means. We don't ever push plow on the sidewalks. It creates hazards for not only the operator if we have a manhole that's an inch high in a sidewalk or a crack in a sidewalk, that's problematic. So it's either by means of a drag plow behind the tractor or a snow blower attachment on the front, or in many cases both. The drag plow is kind of a homegrown implement that the department has designed and has used for 50 years, and it's just a steel fabricated V plow that's pulled behind the tractor. The department has experienced challenges in recent years in continuing to provide this service. First, our staffing levels do not allow sidewalk snow removal to get started in the height of a snow event. Secondly, the bulk of the equipment that we use for this effort is specialized. The sidewalk tractors are not generally used for any other function during the years, and that's always been a goal and a trademark of our public works fleet is multi-use equipment, equipment that isn't used every day for a specific purpose, like our sewer equipment, our jet and our vac. Most of our trucks and loaders are multi-purpose for different functions in different divisions. The sidewalk tractors really have no other functional purpose. The most recent one we purchased has got a small bucket assembly on the front that allows some crossover, but it's a one-off right now. Right now, of our 4 tractors, only 3 are functional, and because we've deferred purchase of this until we've kind of had of additional units until we've had a conversation. These these are not inexpensive pieces of equipment either. And then probably equally important is that because of the way we have to provide this service, it doesn't always achieve a level of service that is representative of other services provided in the community. We oftentimes, and Don can speak to this, have field complaints both on the timing on how long it takes us to get out and start that, and then the quality of the removal. It'll never duplicate in a municipal snow removal process. It'll never duplicate what a walk behind snowblower or hand shoveling will, and that's problematic in some locations. So as we head into the budget development season, we thought it was high time, although it's the middle of July, to be talking about this issue as we begin to plan for not only the next winter season, but our budget development. And as I indicated, Don is available to join us in the discussion and help answer questions. And just in summary, it is certainly not that the staff's recommendation or intent that we would walk away from all municipal sidewalk snow removal. We just think it's probably the time has come to begin to look at the scope of the service, and one option for consideration would be to reduce the coverage of what we take action on to only those priority streets on our major collector streets. We see great value in keeping those walks cleared. Green Bay Road, Dundee Road, Sheridan Road, some of the walking routes in and around the schools, and then continue to maintain the sidewalk clearing in the downtown. But the concept, and it really is more conceptual than anything else today, of us clearing every lineal foot of residential walk in the community is impractical, and it just can't happen with our current staffing model with any efficiency. So with that, I'd open it up, and again, Don's available for any specific operational questions that the board might have.
Joe?
So I think it's one of the many ideas we have to consider for the new normal and what our services are going to be and the cost that we're going to have to provide them. So going back to November and the meeting on legal marijuana, I very publicly noted that the village has to make hard choices on the services we're going to provide and how we're going to pay for them. So in concept, Dave, I would agree with we start down with a scaled version that's focused on downtown, assuming it's not a heavy CapEx investment. But a couple things. I guess number one, we request that there's numbers to look at. And in the memo, it said the replacement tractors, the last one bought in 2014 was $100,000. So if we have a scaled down, what would the cost to the village be? What would the savings to the village be? And what would that coverage area look like? And then secondly, that we get way ahead of the messaging to the public on the plans. So if this is going to happen, and we're decided by September, that we're letting people know in September that, that this is going to be something they need to consider when it snows. That's all for me.
Don, Dave, do you have any thoughts on what a scaled down plan that would be the one that you were suggesting in terms of major thoroughfares and schools, so that what we're really doing is trying to protect the use of those walks and the way that children get to and from school?
We'd have to take a closer look at the routes that we have. So, I mean, Dave mentioned Dundee, Sheridan, Green Bay Road. We take care of the downtown, but we'd have to focus on some of the main collectors that work to all three schools and make sure, some of those routes are covered. We could put together a map that would show that visually, so we could share that with the board so they can get a better understanding of what we would propose. But again, this was just for conversation tonight, and just wanted to get your feedback.
I think from a capital equipment standpoint, we've managed and operated a fleet of 4 tractors. We probably could justify cutting that in half if the scope was reduced proportionally. To have two functional tractors, because we could split off. The downtown work is is ongoing in a snow event, and then we peel off. Oftentimes, the sidewalk snow removal work is off hours, in the overnight hours in the residential areas. So I think we could probably, we'll look at that, but we probably could reduce what has been a fleet of 4 down to 2.
One machine is primarily in the downtown, cleaning those sidewalks. That's a new machine that Dave was mentioning. So, I mean, 2 is possibility, but 3 might be a better picture.
Okay, thank you. Gail?
Excuse me. I agree, knowing how much equipment would be needed for a scaled back program would be good, because if we were only talking about scaling back from 4 to 3, I'm not sure, how much savings there would be. And also just wondering, since we've outsourced other things and found savings from that, have you looked at all into outsourcing this activity? And would there be any type of substantial savings there?
I am unaware of any contractors who would provide sidewalk plowing at that level. And I also looked at trying to lease equipment, see if there's other, possibilities for us. And I just can't find any companies that would do that. It's just not heard of right now.
In addition to looking at the capital, we can certainly bring back the cost implications of a reduced scope on reducing our staff time, both regular and overtime hours for sidewalk snow removal. As I indicated, most of that work is done on the off hours at an overtime rate.
Barbara?
Yeah, I'd be interested in, obviously the idea of finding ways to reduce our budget is important, and this is an obvious one to look at. So one question I had is, was this not asked on a survey that we did a year or 2 ago? And if so, I would be curious as to the response.
Your microphone turned off, Barbara.
I can speak to that briefly, Barbara. This was included actually in our last 2 community surveys. It's probably one of the areas where, while we perform very well in most of our service areas, particularly in the Public Works Department, sidewalk snow removal has not generally gotten the best ratings. What we'll do as a component of coming back to the board around budget time is to also include the information relative to the survey information. There were some free response comments as well that I don't have in front of me that I recall relate to this particular subject matter, and we'll pull back to that info for the board as well.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, in addition to the information that Phil just mentioned, I would be interested in seeing possible plans that Public Works might develop, as well as the labor and material costs for them. One thing I wonder about is, we can all agree in general that it's a good thing to have clear sidewalks, I think, for kids to go to school. But some kids walk a block and other kids walk 5 blocks. And so if we say, well, we're going to clear the school routes, but just close to the schools, that's going to leave out a lot of families. I just see, I don't have an answer to it, but that does seem like a complexity to me. And I would be curious about community input. I agree with Trustee Howalks about messaging on this. I think if we're going to do it, which we probably are, we really have to get messages out there, and ideally do it in a way where people have an opportunity to give us feedback about it. I think that was it.
Thank you, Barbara. Peter, I assume you haven't figured out how to let global warming solve the problem, so we might comment on what we'll have to do to clean up the snow.
Right, right on. So actually you could, and we talked about this at Hoover, use sewer thermal free energy to warm the sidewalks and roads and reduce the amount of plowing. That's something that is done. I think we missed that ball, but anyhow, I would not be sad to see this program go away, although I have a little distress about that only because of the safe routes to school. We have an active transport plan, of which outlines, by the way, the safe routes to school. And it seems logical to have this service at least under the umbrella of safe routes to school in the wintertime. However, I'm not a real big fan of the program overall. It does not seem to provide the value relative to the cost. And so that's where I stand. I wouldn't be too sorry to see it go away, but if it remains in a reduced fashion, that saves us some cost, some budget, and especially if we're not doing it on, if we're able to not do it on overtime. Then I would like to see it applied to the safe routes to schools in downtown areas.
Just a comment to that, I think we absolutely would work together with public safety and District 35. They oftentimes, we would look at the overlap between the safe routes plan that was adopted and what used to be an annual process where they would, publish their school walking routes. And so I think that's a good point, Pete, that we'd want to make sure we address those in any reduced plan.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing, Trustee Hallwax commented on the communication. I think that is absolutely important. People are putting their contracts. We got a call today from our snow removal guy. And so that's something that people will need to be considering. And I wonder if there's communications that ought to go to the landscapers or the snow removal services that one, to manage it so they don't come out and say, oh, the village, a bunch of yahoos canceled this and you need to do it. So make sure they have the right messaging, but also they can be a conduit for very positive messaging saying, hey, by the way, so you don't get caught, please be aware the village is stopping these services and or modifying these services and that you might want to consider this. So anyways, I don't know how much engagement we have with those contractors, if there's a community forum that we leverage, but that might be a way to help manage and get ahead of this.
Actually, we have a conduit. There's an annual license required from the village for those contractors. And so we would be able to use that, the communication that goes out for that, which is, late summer, early fall. We could use that as a means of passing that along. That's a good point.
Gary?
And I did comment, something else for the board to consider is what kind of responsibility would be placed upon the homeowners if we were to scale back. That's something to think about. There are several communities in the area who require the residents to clean their sidewalks. So I'm not sure if that's something that should be talked about, but it should be considered.
Okay, time is moving and we do need to get to the last subject. So with that, Gary, your thoughts?
I have been concerned about some of those quality issues that were briefly mentioned for years. As somebody that walks around the village a fair amount, walking dogs, I've literally had to avoid long stretches of sidewalk that have been plowed because there appear to be glazed ice, and just walked on the median and walked in the snow as it being much safer. So I'm not sure we're always doing people such a favor with the program as it exists because of the practicalities of when people can get to actually go out there and do it. They got to clean up the downtown. They've got to get the streets. They've got other priorities. And then the level of snow and how close they get to the ground is a factor. So I am in favor of both saving the money and limiting this program to that which is absolutely necessary. And I think the safe routes to schools is a very sensitive point that we need to make sure we coordinate about and take care of. So maybe we can do focus on doing something sooner, quicker, faster in those areas that are most critical, while still saving hopefully a fair chunk of overtime and even some capital costs. So by all means, I'm looking forward to seeing the analysis on a reduced program.
And I would just add to that I think we have to look quickly at how do we educate the homeowners and start trying to put more of the responsibility, as Don was talking about, on them to clean up the sidewalks. I think all of that is clear, so I would like to move on to the discussion and presentation that Jordan was going to do for us on the municipal electric aggregation, because we're running late.
All right. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, President Levin and trustees. For your discussion this evening, I'm just going to give a brief overview of electric aggregation. The village has the opportunity to participate in a new municipal electric aggregation program because our community is a member in what's called the North Shore Electric Aggregation Consortium, which I'll just refer to as consortium for the remainder of the presentation. Not to go over everything that was included in tonight's agenda packet, which is a lot of detail. I want to bring you up to quick speed with some general timeframes. Earlier this year, all consortium communities began discussions on a new aggregation concept. The slides that are presently on the screen give an overview of what's mentioned in the agenda packet. Sharon, if you can just go back to the previous slide real quick. The village entered the consortium in 2011, entered into the first aggregation concept in 2012 after a competitive bidding process. I will make note, I'm going to be talking about two different aggregation concepts tonight. Aggregation 1.0 is the first one. The new one will be aggregation 2.0. This aggregation 1.0 was offered to all village residents through a third-party electric provider. This was a fixed rate, which was lower than the ComEd rate at the time, and participating residents, they had the option to opt in or not participate in the program, would receive a financial benefit directly by having their energy serviced by the alternate provider, which in this case was MC² Energy Services. So this was a fixed price option offered to all residents, and the residents directly receive the financial benefit. Next slide, please. So after the completion of the 3-year contract with MC², the consortium as a whole went out to bid again, but due to market conditions at the time, the alternate service provider rate was not less than ComEd, and so all residents in the village and other consortium member communities went back to ComEd rate, and at that time aggregation stalled again due to market conditions. ComEd had a more competitive rate financially. Some of the board members who were with last summer, we talked about community solar. We can have a further discussion on that at a later date, but I just wanted those brief snippets are in the packet, and the village is participating in a community solar program for village facilities only. For discussion this evening, earlier this year, the village resumed communications about aggregation 2.0, which I mentioned. And Sharon, next slide, please. For your feedback this evening, I'll give a brief overview of aggregation 2.0. If the board is interested in pursuing this further, the action that would need to be taken would be in August to have a public hearing and adopt an ordinance. This is not to agree to participate in the aggregation 2.0. This is before the village would participate in the consortium's competitive bidding process, an RFP, to just kind of test the waters and see what's out there. We'd have to amend our current plan of governance and operations, which was adopted back in 2012 when all of this started. So that's why we're bringing it to your attention this evening. The new concept, slightly different. More details are on the screen. I hope you can see that. What's of note, and I want to drive this point home, unlike Aggregation 1.0, that first program in the early 2000s that I just mentioned, this new concept 2.0 would have some customers based on their electric consumption, and we've been working with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus electrical advisor to determine this. It's not me doing the calculations. I can't explain the full details there, so forgive me. A select group of Glencoe residents and small business consumers, customers would be given this option, and any price difference, discrepancy in delivering electricity to that select group, the financial rebate would be offered to the village as the municipality in the form of a grant. And with that, in terms of a quantitative estimate, the the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus electrical advisor has estimated that the village's possible maximum rebate, if every single eligible residential and small business customer switched, would be an approximate $28,000 to $29,000 a year in municipal grant funding. Again, key elements: the consumers would not directly receive that benefit. The municipality would, which could be used to further pay for sustainability initiatives, other environmentally related efforts such as purchasing renewable energy credits. But I wanted to make that discrepancy between the 1.0 and the 2.0. Next slide, please. So as I wrap up that very brief explanation of the two programs, what we'd like the board's feedback is, if the board is interested in testing the waters with every other municipal member of the consortium that has indicated their support, every other one has, we would need to, again in August, hold a public hearing to amend the ordinance. The ordinance amendment would just be saying, hey, this is a new type of aggregation which was not available or considered in the early 2000s and was not included in the original ordinance. We'd have to legally amend that through a new ordinance, and then we could participate in the consortium's RFP, which is planned to go out in August. Participation in the RFP does not require the any municipality to accept any third-party alternate service provision. The RFP is still in draft form, but it would go out for both Aggregation 1.0, 2.0, and any other option that might be out there, just to see what financially is out there. But I'd welcome the board's feedback at this point to see if this is something we're interested in moving forward with, because it is time sensitive due to all other consortium members' interest in moving forward at a quick pace. So I'm opening it to questions and board feedback at this time.
I'll make quickly poll the board, and if you don't have any great questions, then we can move it quickly. Joe?
No questions.
Are you in favor of our looking at this?
Yes.
Gail? Gail, are you there? We'll come back to you. Barbara?
I find these to be both strange, but nevertheless, I don't see a downside to looking into it. I wouldn't sneeze at $28,000 or $29,000 potentially. It's all good.
Yep. Peter?
I'm in favor of further exploration.
Gary?
It was not at all clear to me, and I appreciate the complexity of the matter, so thank you for the presentation. But what I didn't understand is, are people being asked to choose an electric provider and that would then lose the benefit they might otherwise have gotten themselves, and instead it goes to the village? That's what I couldn't figure out.
So that's a good question. Forgive me if I didn't explain that as clearly. So the village is not currently participating in an aggregation program. So as it stands, all village residents are on the ComEd, are receiving electric service from ComEd. There's no option for them at this point to go with a designated alternate service provider. So it's not like we would be taking a financial benefit that they're currently receiving away from them. What's new in this point, in this program is you're right, is that the benefit would instead, unlike in the early 2000s in aggregation 1.0, during 2.0, the municipality would receive those benefits. I hope that's clear, and I'd be happy to restate that. But you're right, it is very nuanced. It's just the recipient of the funding is the municipality, and through that, the residents and whatever the municipality determines to put those grant funds towards, but it's not a direct benefit and financially in their bill.
If I could.
So if the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If I hear what you're saying it wouldn't reduce the costs to the recipient. It wouldn't be higher either. I mean, to the resident. But to the extent
Correct.
the actual cost is lower than what they would have otherwise paid to ComEdison, that savings would go to the village.
Yes, that's correct, President Levin.
Would it possibly be, though, that when if these variable rates go up and they are higher than ComEd, that people that are participating through this aggregation program literally are paying higher rates than they would with ComEd?
That's a good question, and we'd want to explore that in the RFP process. And I don't have an answer right now, but I'd be happy to look into that further.
I mean, I'm fine putting it on the agenda, but I think we need more information, because what I don't want is you get something and you go, hey, the village wants to do X, you know, and if you want to opt out, because that's what you're telling people, the village wants to do something, and if you don't want to do it, you have to opt out. Okay. If that's the case, then that's the message. But I don't want that to wind up costing people more money than if we just stayed out of it in the first place. I don't mind $30,000 coming to the village, obviously. I'm much more concerned about the potential for individuals paying a lot of extra rate, well above that total amount in aggregate for our village, because the alternate providers' variable rates are higher than a perhaps fixed rate that we could have gotten from ComEd if that was available. So I just want to cover the different scenarios before we decide to go forward with the program.
Right, and your points are very well taken. Thank you.
My assumption would be if the contract and what was offered once we went out to bid did not protect our residents against that, we would not choose to participate. The board would say, no, we don't want to participate. So that's how I thought we would cover that.
Correct. The village would not be obligated to accept. If the village were to participate in the RFP process, the village is not legally bound to accept that rate.
Right. I just don't know what the nature of the RFP itself is and how they address those issues and what the consequences are for the individuals, whether it's a business owner or a consumer in the village.
The way we did it the last time that we went through this is we included in the terms things like the ability to opt out if the rates went or more than ConEd's, et cetera. And I assume that the RFP will either contain similar language and we'll get that kind of a contract, or we won't accept it. We won't.
And I imagine that we'd have a more clear RFP draft to share with the board to help inform you with your decision. Trustee Rubin.
I would just add, Trustee Rubin, if the board is choosing to move forward with public hearing in August, what we would intend to do during that presentation is to explain and answer the questions that you're asking tonight, so that as the process moves forward, we're all clear on what it is. And again, if the board chooses to accept the RFP response at some point in the future, later this fall, then obviously we'd all know what the requirements would be with that acceptance. So your feedback's very helpful as we work with our neighboring communities on this. Thanks.
Gail,
Thank you.
Before we move on.
Yes, we can move on. I'm in agreement that it's something to explore.
Okay, to move on quickly, as I read, what we are trying to say is we want to explore it. You have the comments of what is our concern, so you can take that into account. And so you should move forward on that basis. Having gone through that, I think we're late, and this is the time to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Roll call, please.
Trustee Hallwax,
Yes.
Trustee Listener,
Yes.
Trustee Miller,
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney,
yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned. Would you let me know when we're ready to move into the trustees meeting? Sharon.
You can begin it now.
We're ready?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. In order to make sure that we are clear on this meeting, in case you weren't in the last meeting, let me go over a few details at the beginning. Pursuant to recently adopted amendments to the Illinois Open Meetings Act, included in Public Act 101-0640, public bodies may, in certain circumstances, hold entirely virtual public meetings without a quorum physically present in any one location. On March 17, 2020, I issued a declaration of emergency pursuant to the authority granted by the Village Code, the Illinois Municipal Code, and the Illinois Emergency Management Act to address the health threats posed by COVID-19 and the pandemic. On June 15, 2020, I executed a written determination that given the ongoing emergency associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, in-person meetings of the village's Board of Trustees are not practical or prudent at this time and until further notice. On June 26, 2020, Governor Pritzker new disaster proclamation and executive order 2020-43 that declared in-person attendance at public meetings of more than 50 people at the regular public meeting location to be infeasible in accordance with the Open Meetings Act as amended by Public Act 101-0640. In accordance with the governor's disaster proclamation, my declaration of emergency, and my recent determination regarding meetings of the Village Board of Trustees, I, as Village President of the Village of Glencoe, hereby renew my determination that in-person meetings of the Board of Trustees are not practical or prudent at this time and until further notice. Accordingly, this meeting of the Village Board of Trustees is being conducted virtually, with members participating through Zoom webinar platform. Village Manager Corrali is in the boardroom at Village Hall as required by the Open Meetings Act. May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax,
Here?
Trustee Listener,
Here.
Trustee Miller,
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney,
Here.
Trustee Rubin,
Here.
Trustee Vreet. We have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you. As noted, today's Village Board meeting is conducted as a virtual meeting via Zoom webinar software and is being audio recorded and simulcast on the Village's Facebook page in compliance with the state law and as the Village continues to support social distancing to prevent the spread of COVID-19. A quorum of members of the board are present via remote access. Before we begin the formal business of the agenda, I would like to ask Village Attorney Steve Elrod to underscore the legal basis for holding a virtual meeting.
President Levin, I actually incorporated my remarks into the prepared remarks that you read earlier. So you said it all and well.
Excellent. We saved a lot of money because you didn't have to go through it a second time. All righty. To help facilitate this meeting, I ask each member of the village board and staff to mute your lines if you are not speaking, and mute your line and unmute it when you do speak to help minimize background noise. Let me try and do that with all the things I have coming in. I asked each member of the vote, okay, I went through that. Members of the public are muted and should remain muted during the meeting. Members of the public should not share their video. To turn off your video, click the video camera button at the bottom of your screen so that the button turns red. After each agenda item is presented, I will ask each trustee if they have any questions or comments. I will call the trustees in alphabetical order. As required by law, I will ask for a roll call rather than voice vote on any agenda item requiring a vote. Okay, consideration of the minutes. The next order of business is our consideration of a motion to approve the following meeting minutes. The Board of Trustees regular meeting on June 18th, 2020 at 7 p.m. I would note that there was a typo on page 4 of the minutes, page 6 in the packet. Item B, report of village president, line 3, after the third word in, after the word is should be inserted the word his. So it reads, it is his recommendation. Are there any other corrections or comments with respect to the minutes? If there are none, may I have a motion to adopt the minutes?
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax,
Yes.
trustee Listener,
Yes.
trustee Miller,
Yes.
trustee Mulvaney,
Yes.
trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Okay. In accordance with the supplemental rules the board approved on April 16, 2020, here is how public comment will be taken at this meeting. The email address and telephone number designated for public comment for this meeting were published with the meeting agenda. In a moment, I will ask Management Analyst Deputy Clerk Jordan Lister to read the public comments on non-agenda items that were submitted prior to the meeting in compliance with the instructions that were previously published with the meeting materials. I wanted to provide a brief statement of the subject of these comments. If a member of the public would like to submit a public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to Glencoe meeting, that's singular, at villageofglencoe.org. Comments submitted during the meeting may be read at the end of the meeting. Written comments should be limited to 400 words. I have a brief statement that I would like to make before we proceed with our regular business. Over the last few weeks, we've heard from some members of the community about chalk messages that have been written on sidewalks in the downtown, both regarding the presence of chalk itself and the content of individual messages. I'd like to take a moment to share the village's approach to sidewalk chalk, and more importantly, talk about how we can engage in thoughtful dialogue in our community about the issues of racism and social equity. In my decades of involvement with village government, the village has never had a practice of removing sidewalk chalk of any kind. In the past, even very recent past, there have been instances where chalk messages that have expressed hope during the pandemic support of our business community, or statements about equality have shown up on sidewalks all over Glencoe. The village views chalk messages as temporary and has not taken steps to remove any chalk messages of any kind in the last 2 weeks or at any time in the past. The village does not take a position of agreement or disagreement with any temporary chalk messages that have been written, crossed out, or rewritten, and importantly, there could be constitutional implications if the village as a government were to selectively remove some temporary messages and not others. Given the sensitive nature of this subject, I and our village staff consulted with the village attorney and determined that the chalk messages, either in the last 2 weeks or at any time in the past, because they may be constitutionally protected and are not by nature and they are by nature very temporary, have not been a violation of any village ordinances. It is important for us also to move beyond the issue of chalk itself to the broader issue of equity and inclusion, and together engage in meaningful dialogue and discourse. The welcoming and inclusive community pledge that the village adopted and hundreds of our residents have signed is clear that hate has no home here. The lives of Black people are important. Racism, anti-Semitism, and religious discrimination, or the unequal treatment of any people, are important issues that must be discussed within our community and society to help us continue growing as a welcoming and inclusive community. The Village of Glencoe Community Relations Forum is working to support dialogue in our community, and I encourage everyone to engage in opportunities to listen, learn from each other, and share experiences to help us grow together. Thank you. Jordan, at this time, I would ask you to read any public comments received on non-agenda items, if any.
Yes, thank you, President Levin. We received 3 public comments in advance of this meeting through email. And if there's any in-person members, I would ask Village Manager Corrali to assist with that. The first public comment this evening is from Dr. Shelley Ashkenazi, and the doctor's comments are as follows. Chalkings. Number 1, the village manager states that the chalking of our village is not defacement, violation of Ordinance 24-10, because the messages are written in chalk. The definition of deface is to mar the surface or appearance of, to disfigure, example, to deface a wall by writing on it. It doesn't say, except if it's in chalk. Where can I find the village attorney's opinion documenting how he concluded that chalking is not defacing? Number 2, since the village endorsed a BLM chalking event organized by Ashby Beasley and a youth organization, which other individuals and organizations will be allowed to hold political and religious chalking events? Is there an official application process for such events? Where can I find the rules for what chalkers are not allowed to draw/write? Number 3, BLM's charter demonstrates that they are anti-Semitic and potentially terrorist. So allowing BLM graffiti violates Ordinance 24-11. The graffiti fully intends to alarming, disturb, and destroy peace. Some of it constitutes hate crimes. We know that the words and pictures have the power to harm, whether in chalk or not. Number 4, after the Ashby-Beasley chalk event, the sidewalks were power washed. Did residents' taxes pay for this service, or will the village send Ms. Beasley and her group a bill? Number 5, the Chicago Tribune coverage of the Beesby chalking made Glencoe a target and therefore unsafe. Now all Chicagoland knows that Glencoe is a 92% white suburb that needs to get woke, and the village ordinances are not enforced. Dr. Ashkenazi says, I am white, Jewish, and apparently not liberal enough. Between current graffiti and the Tribune article, I feel discriminated against and unsafe here. I will no longer be able to patronize downtown Glencoe businesses. Number 6, since the village is no longer enforcing ordinances 24-10 and 24-11, they are not providing the services they've agreed to in these ordinances. In addition, my tax money may have been used to clean up after an event promoting discrimination and hate. Finally, I now feel personally unsafe here, so I'd like to know how to apply for a tax refund. In closing, Glencoe's downtown should be a neutral zone where everyone can feel safe and included. The village should not be ignoring ordinances to play political favorites or endorsing hate crimes. Sincerely, Shelley Ashkenazi, PhD. That was the first public comment that we received. The second public comment we received is from Mark Schott. And Mark states, Glencoe Ordinance 24-10 prohibits defacing public property. Nowhere in the ordinance does the word permanent appear. However, presently the village government is not enforcing their own ordinance, according to the village manager, reportedly at the advice of the village attorney and with the support of the village board. This has the net effect of creating two groups or classes in Glencoe: those residents who are required to follow the laws and ordinances or face fines, and those who do not. The fact that the group to whom the law is not being applied is indulging in hate speech by expressing support for an organization whose charter is, by legal definition, anti-Semitic is particularly disturbing. The village governance must correct this or deal with the obvious consequences. If not, I and other residents want to know if we get to pick and choose which village ordinances to obey. Respectfully, Mark Schott. And then the third public comment that we received through email is from Nisha Haku. And Nisha states, to whom it may concern, I am really concerned about the offensive comments made by the individual highlighted in the video footage and Tribune article. Ms. Haku included a link to a video in her email. I know this person's ignorant, and ignorant rhetoric is not shared by our whole community. I urge Glencoe to put a statement on this issue. As a new resident to Glencoe, I want to know that all people are welcome and respected. Thank you for your consideration. Respectfully, Nisha Haku. And that was the third and final public comment we received through email, President Levin.
Thank you. And I can emphasize, I think that the comments, having talked a little bit about what our policies have been and are, and that highlight why it is so important for the Community Relations Forum to work to support dialogue in our community and to encourage everyone to engage in opportunities to listen, learn from each other, and share experiences to help us grow together. And I think that's the proper forum for those comments and thoughts to be taken up by, as opposed to us tonight in this particular meeting. Any comments from, other than that, from any of the trustees, or can we move on to the next order of business?
Mr. President, before we move on from public comment, there is one in-person individual here at the Village Hall who would like to address the board briefly.
Certainly.
And just 1 second, we want to make sure that we unmute the computer that the resident is using. Hold on.
And while, Mr. President, that's contrary to the village rules, you as the head of the public body have the ability to hear or deviate from the rules if you so desire.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lori Gross Tuckman, co-chair of the Glencoe Village Nominating Committee. The Glencoe Caucus is now accepting applications for consideration in the nominating process for positions on the Glencoe Village Board, Glencoe Park District Board, Glencoe Library Board, and School District 35 Board, with terms starting in 2021. Application forms are available on the Glencoe Caucus website at glencoecaucus.org. The deadline for submitting application forms is September 15th, 2020. And for more information, please see the Glencoe Caucus website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori. And I would emphasize that what has served our village so well for many years is the outstanding service that the caucus provides in getting candidates for our village board and village president. So I would certainly urge anyone interested in serving to go and fill out the forms and present themselves to the caucus.
Mr. President, if I may add, just for the record, the caucus is a political party, and I just want to make sure that the village of Glencoe is not endorsing caucus activities. That's an independent organization. Although they do have the right, as Ms. Tuckman did, to make a statement during our public comment period.
They have a right, and we do not endorse anybody in that respect. And they are technically, under the law, a party.
Correct.
President Levin?
Yes, Peter.
I respect that your suggestion to move this response to a different form, but it seems to me there were a couple of direct questions, and especially the first and second letters, it seemed like we can emphasize, because I know you mentioned in our opening comments, in which your words I thought were excellent, and you clearly stated that we've not ever paid for the removal of any chalk, and yet I think there's that perception out there, as I think very clearly expressed in the first letter. I wonder if we could address just a few of those key points or just reiterate that, so that we are not silent on some of these issues and appearing to push this aside. I think we ought to have at least some acknowledgement of that. The other direct question I think was asked was whether or not she could see the logic for the discussion about why chalk is considered as a temporary message, something that is appropriate or okay in our perspective.
Yes, I'll ask the village manager to comment on that, but I will note that, for example, on Thursday, a number of people put chalk messages on our sidewalk in downtown, and they finished that, and then Thursday night it rained and they were all gone. Phil, would you like to address any of the questions? I think that Peter has a good point that we should make clear.
Absolutely, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. This is Village Manager Phil Corrali. I did just want to make mention of the fact that the village has not at any time, as the President mentioned this evening, gone out and removed chalk messages in our downtown. There was a rainstorm that took place the night after that chalking event that was referenced last week, and that process and that rain itself did wash off the chalk. I think to some degree, and I'd ask the village attorney to perhaps assist in this explanation, that gives some additional clarity to the point that we've made relative to the temporary nature of these chalk messages. And Attorney Allrod, I'd ask perhaps that you could further outline that point.
I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to provide you with my thoughts and my opinion, as I have the village president and the village manager when they've asked it of me. Just in response to the very direct question of where can they find my opinion, I have not written an opinion on this. I've been asked verbally and I've responded verbally to the village president and the village manager. I believe the village manager offered one resident the opportunity to give me a call, and I'm happy to do that. and express or provide my thoughts on this. The village code on defacement does not define what is defacement. So what we do is look to practice by the village of Glencoe, and we've gone back and looked at decades of whether chalk constitutes the level of defacement that would be interpreted to be included within the context of the ordinance provision. It is my opinion, and I have seen ordinances, I've written ordinances in other towns, in other states that have specifically referred to chalk drawings as constituting defacement. Glencoe's does not. And it does not because it is not a permanent basis for the obstruction or defacement of the public property. Glencoe has never enforced or it used this ordinance against chalk drawings of any kind, whether it's by a child drawing a hopscotch drawing or other figures on a sidewalk, or as there occurred post 9/11, some 9-10 years ago, when there were drawings on the sidewalk in support of various first responders, and at the beginning of the pandemic, when there were chalk drawings earlier on of showing support for the village or first responders. If Glencoe desires to adopt a stricter approach to defacement, it could do so. It would have to consider the ramifications, however, and enforcement. The one thing that I caution the village manager and his staff against is selective enforcement. We must, and we must not do content-based enforcement. Our enforcement of our laws must be equally applied, and they must not be with regard to the content of the material. So my opinion is based on my reading of the law as it is currently drafted in the Glencoe Code and the practice and historical application of that law over the past decades.
Thank you, Steve. Do any of the other trustees have any comments?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the one of the letter writers mentioned the opinion that Glencoe had sponsored I believe the event that got posted on Facebook, and I just wanted to clarify that Glencoe did not do that.
Thank you, Barbara. And as I said in my remarks, we neither take position in favor or against anything that has been placed on there, and we certainly do not sponsor anything that relates to chalking. Any other comments? Thank you. All right, our next order of business is committee reports. And I wanted to mention that we had our committee of the whole this evening. And in that time frame, we went through a series of discussions to hear reports from our staff. They included a discussion with respect to recommendations from the village staff regarding pursuing Ecodistrict certification and how to use the principles that we had, our sustainability task force had looked at in considering that. One of the other subjects discussed was a discussion of Chapter 34 of the Glencoe Village Code regarding the village's tree preservation ordinance. There was also a discussion of snow removal for sidewalks during the winter. And there was a discussion and presentation with regard to municipal electric aggregation and where that stands currently. That's what we covered in our committee of the whole. Barbara, could you give us a little background and tell us a little bit about what happened at the Finance Committee on Tuesday? Because Trustee Dree is out of town and was not able to be at that meeting as well as tonight.
Yes, of course. The Finance Committee met on Tuesday of this week, the 14th, and talked about the monthly treasurer's report for the village and the golf club, as well as the community investment program, which is capital improvements, or used to be called capital improvements. So as of June, our general fund revenues are on target for our budget, and expenses are well below budget. The waterfront revenue is also on target as of the month of June. So this month's report reflected the very early impacts of COVID-19 on sales tax, because it included March figures, which is when the shutdown began. So obviously these numbers are going to go down again, and our early look at July, which reflects April's numbers, show a significant downturn in sales tax. The projections for Glencoe have been updated. And so we found, we being staff actually, not the Finance Committee, found over $2 million in revenue that we can save this year. So we've got, the projection is about $2 million that we're going to lose, and they found that more than enough to cover. But those include deferral of some capital items that eventually we will have to take care of. So the Finance Committee and the board, along with staff, continue to work on finding ways to deal with the financial impact of COVID. Our community improvement program is on track with most of our projects moving forward. The downtown sidewalk paver restoration was completed, and the parking lot lighting improvements is almost complete. Also, the ERP project continues, and the go live of the utility billing is scheduled for August. And the Tudor Court project, which I hope people have taken a look at, is expected to be finished later this summer. Any questions?
Okay, you've been very busy, so if there are no questions on the Finance Committee report, you had a very lengthy meeting last night on the Plan Commission. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened at the Plan Commission?
Yes, the Plan Commission, I think we started at 6 and we finished around 10:30. That was last night, and the agenda item was to consider the final plat of subdivision from the developers of the what is called the Hoover Estate, which is the property at 1801 Green Bay Road. As the board may recall, there was a preliminary plat which the board approved in October. Most of the issues with that plat there were conditions, I should say, that we approved, and most of those conditions related to stormwater management. And the biggest item there was something that is now called Bulletin 75, which is updated rainfall data, increased rainfall, which has required an enlarged attention for that project. So since October, staff has met multiple times and seen multiple drafts from the developer as they move toward their final plat of subdivision. And staff concluded that the conditions that were set forth in the preliminary approval have been met. So a little more detail about the meeting. Obviously, it was an important one, and it is going to come before the board, presumably, if the Finance Committee sends it forward. So there were about 25 or 30 comments from the public that were read into the record last night. Most of these were from neighbors who have homes in the Terrace Court sewer basin. And these are people, as you may recall, who've experienced a lot of flooding over the years. And their most recent flooding event was with the heavy rains in May. They had the same concerns that they voiced last fall to us when we reviewed the preliminary plat. And the bottom line is they're concerned that development of the Hoover estate is going to increase their flooding problems. In addition, many of them felt that there was more than 1,000 pages of materials, which was put up on the village's website about 2.5 weeks ago, but it is an awful lot of material, and they felt that they didn't really have enough time to review that material, and so they asked to have this meeting postponed. We didn't postpone the meeting, but we did address their concern, I think, at least in part. There are a few other topics that were raised by neighbors and by commissioners. There was concern about sanitary sewer backups, whether that might become more of a problem with development. There was concern about buckthorn removal. Number one, people wanted transparency on what was going to be done with it. And also concern about whether there would be potential leaching of herbicides that are used in some cases in connection with buckthorn removal. There were comments about the destruction and replacement of trees, about the adequacy of traffic control at the intersection of Wesley and Green Bay Road, and about the protection of village finances if the developer and/or the homeowners association fails in their obligation to do the maintenance work on the stormwater system. So not surprisingly, most of the meeting was flood control. The Terrace Court Basin neighbors recently hired an experienced local engineer by the name of Dan Creaney to review the materials from the developer, as well as Glencoe staff's response. Mr. Creaney wrote a letter to the commission, which raised a number of concerns about the developer's proposed flood control plan. James Teague on the village staff was able to very quickly respond to most of those, and it does seem as if the concerns that Mr. Creaney had could be addressed by further discussions between staff and Mr. Creaney. So while the commissioners felt that the developer had very probably met its burden, in other words, that the conditions were met, they nevertheless decided to postpone this hearing for 1 week to next Wednesday so that Mr. Creaney and staff could meet, and that would give the opportunity for these concerns to be addressed. Accordingly, there is going to be a meeting on Monday with Dave Mao and James Teague, as well as Mr. Creaney and the village's stormwater engineering consultant and some representatives from the developer. The next meeting, therefore, on this, where the Plan Commission will be asked to to agree to the final approval, will be Wednesday, July 22nd. Quickly, we had another meeting on June 24th since our last board meeting, and that was for exterior design review for the sign on the south side of the Hometown Coffee building. It was given a temporary approval pending zoning approval because the sign requires some zoning variations. Zoning board will meet on Monday, August 3rd to talk about that.
Thank you, Barbara. I would just ask, just to clarify and make sure, I know that they had some concern about how much material had to be reviewed, and that while that's partially addressed by the meeting that's going to take place next week, in the event that after that meeting, the Plan Commission is satisfied with their final plan and approves it, then it will come to us at the board, as I understand it, and that will give them another month to prepare and to address any concerns to the board as well, because the actual plan doesn't get approved until the board approves it. Am I correct about that?
Yes, you are absolutely right, and that is a point worth making. So yes, the board is the one that gives final approval. And so this was really belt and suspenders. Right. The developer obviously is hoping that the Plan Commission will give approval next week, and that would give enough time for them to get before the board for our August meeting.
Okay, and so that way any questions that are being raised by the homeowners, they still have 5 weeks to prepare them and present them to us.
Yes.
Thank you. Joe, can I have a report on what's been going on with the Golf Advisory Committee?
Sure. The committee's next meeting is on Monday, the 20th, but I have some fairly positive numbers to report, which, you know, if as awful as COVID has been, it has been a good thing for golf because people are reconnecting with the outside and old friends, and Glencoe Golf Course is providing people a way to do that. And I don't want Pete to remind me that people can also go there to just also enjoy nature and bird watching and butterflies. And it's a wonderful place. We've had for June 1,775 rounds per week and 7,600 on the month, which is a record, and it broke the previous record by 600 rounds. We've averaged 600 range players per week, so 600 players that have gone to the driving range. 2,500 buckets of balls have been sold. If you've not been there, I would encourage you to go look at what they've done to really enforce safety measures. So the pro shop remains closed to the public. It's a very regimented operation in terms of how they're keeping things clean and keeping people socially distanced. As of May 29th, restrictions were lifted to allow 2 riders per cart. One of the things unique to Glencoe Golf Course is they're still allowing people to take single carts at no charge. Strategic move by Stella and staff to build loyalty, because many of the neighboring communities are taking advantage of the situation and charging each individual basically double. So greens fees are $64,800 over budget, and cart fees are $10,000 over budget. So it's been nice to report really positive news, given how much we were impacted earlier in the year and how much rain has impacted the course and play over the last several years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Pete, is there anything to report with respect to the Sustainability Task Force?
Well, you know there is. So our group is always working hard to make Glencoe the most sustainable and desirable community in the universe. And a few little examples that I can express are working with staff. Thank you, village staff, for working with us to get the trash day and recycle pickup day coordinated. For those who don't know, the curbside pickup trash days, all of that material goes to a landfill. And so we've been working with organizations to have recycle days in advance so that that material can be reused as opposed to go to landfills. So thank you to staff for helping us with that initiative. We're also looking into something called TerraCycle, more to come. We, of course, prepared for this, for our meeting of the whole Ecodistrict presentation. Thank you, Megan, for the good presentation you gave us earlier. For anybody who's just joining, feel free to check that out. I think it was recorded. And we're also, of course, organizing a speaker series with the library starting in September on water. And our working title at the moment has to do with being a Great Lakes neighbor, being a coastal community, comes with responsibilities and privileges. So something along those lines. So those are some examples of what we've been working on. And if I could, I wanted to mention that the task force was interested in working with this, the so-called Hoover Estate development. We were late to get some comments in, but the Barbara, Trustee Miller, I was hoping that you could address a couple of thoughts or concerns. One is, it's our understanding that the stormwater runoff from the Hoover Estate post-development would actually be reduced due to the control and detention of that stormwater. And so it's our understanding that that stormwater risk is actually reduced. And then the other point is on the sanitary line. I believe we have a sanitary sewer model, a computer model, which could easily, I think, should be easily able to identify if diverting some of the sanitary flows from the development of 30-odd homes and splitting that flows would cause any kind of backup. It seems to me that is an easy demonstration to help alleviate concerns. So those are my thoughts from the Transportation Task Force. Thank you very much.
Barbara, do you have any further comments?
I'm not going to try to address it technically. Your first question, there a couple words cut in and out. My dog may be participating for a moment. I'm sorry if that happens. But if I understood you correctly, were you asking about whether there was a flow reduction in the plan?
I think what Peter was asking is, does the stormwater retention plan as now put together reduce the amount of stormwater and its rate of flow over the lands of the neighbors?
Right, yes, okay. All right, that's what I thought. So the answer is yes, because, and Dave Mao will hopefully jump in if I go too far afield here. The answer is yes, because for one thing, stormwater, there's increased detention on the property. There are increases in, I don't know, weirs, valves, something like that, that reduces that controls the speed of the flow. And while some of the flow is still going to go southeast into the terrace court basin, some of it also is going to go both underground and overland into the Turnbull Woods. So overall, there's anticipated to be, I think, a significant reduction in the amount that gets to the neighbors. Their flooding issues should be alleviated, at least in part, by the work that will be done.
Great, thank you. I actually missed one of my bullet points. If I could amend my comments. I recall the last time this developer came to us as a board, we had promoted and strongly encouraged a range of sustainability practices. Not the least amongst was the protection of more trees. And of course, we had a tree discussion earlier this evening about our ordinances. So I think right behind the issue of stormwater management was the issue of tree protection. And then beyond that is other sustainability practices, all of which the Sustainability Task Force is interested in promoting throughout Glencoe, whether it's this development or elsewhere. And so I wonder if the developer, or last night you discussed any further sustainability initiatives.
Such as pervious pavers and things.
There was one other question you asked, which I just want to answer quickly if I can, and that was about sanitary sewer. And if I understood your question correctly, there is going to be some sanitary flow in that direction, and some will be heading west. But that, in fact, I asked that question last night myself because some of the residents had been concerned that increase in sanitary flow was going to increase their, was going to come into their homes basically. And the answer is that that there is a huge amount of sanitary capacity, and this increase in it is not going to make any difference at all, either in the sanitary or stormwater programs that we've got. We did not talk a lot about the tree program. My understanding, my recollection is that all of the points that we had, that the board had listed on our requirements for approval after the first round have been addressed between staff and the developer, so that those have been addressed in this new plan or the updated plan. But I don't recall the details of those anymore.
Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. Is that answered to the best we can, the questions, Peter?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Gary, you had a very interesting evening last evening in terms, or recently, I should say, with respect to the Community Relations Forum that relates to subjects we've talked about tonight. Can you give us a report on their work?
Certainly. Actually had a couple of meetings so far in the last several weeks as the Community Relations Forum has been reconstituted and re-energized. And in fact, and the next meeting is Wednesday. And after that, I believe, Sharon, correct me, it's going to be the first and third Wednesdays of the month. We're planning on meeting twice a month going forward, given the quantity of things to talk about and the amount of time that people feel is appropriate, because there's a lot to do and a lot to talk about. I think our chairperson, Dipti Clark, used the phrase, we're currently in the exploratory phase, which is learning more about people's experiences with racism in our community, both from the people on the forum itself and from others, and with the goal of ultimately trying to enhance, encourage more communication about the subject, and to formulate hopefully actions to be taken or policies to be adopted to address racism in our community. And in doing so, and in that part of that process, partnering, and by I mean process, I mean every step of the way, including right now, just listening as well as discussing and trying to come up with plans, partnering with the various government boards, such as this board here, and all of them in Glencoe, as well as the civic organizations, the business organizations, religious groups, et cetera, Chamber of Commerce, Family Services of Glencoe. Part of what we're dealing with is getting our arms around how do we engage people in the community to have what can be, for everyone, difficult conversations. And for the people that have experienced racism, how to get them to share stories they've probably already told other people and are difficult to tell, and to, especially if perhaps they think that nothing will come of it, other than good intentions and people listening. So just getting people to talk is itself something that we're trying to address. How do we foster this greater communication within our community generally, and also to us as a forum, and with us? We all have our own biases and we have to recognize that, and that shapes our perceptions and ultimately our opinions about things. So how do we increase our empathy for other people, and therefore be willing to listen to other people's points of view and see things from other people's perspectives, and have actual discussions, as opposed to everybody just going to their corner about a particular issue and just staying there and hunkering down and throwing arguments back and forth. How do we become allies of people when, if we happen to see incidences where people need and should be supported in dealing with these kinds of issues of racism, inclusivity, et cetera? How do we encourage people to speak out when they see racism in our community? We talked quite a bit about the chalking that went on in downtown. And one of the things that the forum is doing is individual members are trying to reach out to talk to specific people that were involved in the incident or who have commented to this board. And we would like to hear from them and talk with them about their particular points of view. We have spoken with folks at Writers Theater, and what we're intending and hope to be able to do is have people come from Writers Theater either the senior, not either, both the senior staff and their talent that have worked there, and find out directly from them what their experiences have been in Glencoe, on the theory that, you know, we may think we know, but if we're not experiencing it ourselves, we don't know what people have experienced in order to be able to try to engender the conversation and then hopefully try to do things in a positive light. How do you reach out to people in Glencoe that probably just sit there and shrug and go, you know, everything's fine here. We don't have that problem here. Because there are people here that certainly feel that way, and they may have their own good reasons for thinking that, but others would disagree. So, you know, how do we become a more affirmatively welcoming community in meaningful ways and address these issues that are affecting our society as a whole, you know, including right here in Glencoe? So it is a work in process, but the work has begun. And I think I will speak as to the other members of the forum and not as to myself to say that that's a very earnest group with a lot of talent and ability and a willingness to put themselves out there and discuss these difficult issues and feel, you know, safe and trusting in doing so. So I think we will be well served by these folks, and I'm looking forward to working with them.
Thank you, Gary. Okay. The next order of business is the village manager's report. Phil, there are a lot of important aspects. Do you want to lead us through that?
Good evening. Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We do, I'll apologize in advance. The manager's report this evening is a little longer than it usually is, as we do have some important subjects to dive into and to talk through. And the first item under my report this evening was going to be a report facilitated by Public Safety Director Lewandowski. In recent weeks, questions from our community about various policies, procedures, and protocols in the Glencoe Public Safety Department have been shared with me and with the chief, especially questions related to the use of force in our department's policing efforts. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I've asked Director of Public Safety Lewandowski to share a report and presentation regarding the Public Safety Department's training protocols and policies on this subject and how our officers, and to talk through how our officers are trained. A comprehensive report was included in tonight's agenda packet. We're going to make sure that folks at home can find that report as well so that they can read through it. But as I said, I'd like to hand over the microphone, so to speak, to Director Lewandowski and have him walk us through his report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. I'd like to provide a brief overview of the memo that Phil referred to regarding public safety use of force, training policies, and some data collection. As you know, public safety is unique. All of our officers are fully cross-trained as police officers, firefighters, and EMTs or paramedics. It's very unique in Illinois. And part of that uniqueness means that we have to abide by certification and training mandates from the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board for police activities, the Office of the Illinois State Fire Marshal for our fire activities, and the Illinois Department of Public Health regarding our medical activities. First of all, before someone gets hired as an officer, there's a lengthy hiring process that every 2 years, our Public Safety Commission initiates a new process to create an eligibility list. The process involves a written examination, a pre-employment assessment center, and an oral interview with the Public Safety Commission to create an eligibility list. As openings are created in the department, as candidates get offered employment, then they undergo an extensive background investigation, behavioral analysis, and psychological assessment by a licensed psychologist. And in fact, our Public Safety Commission is always looking to improve our processes, so we're hoping to add a character component to our examinations during our next process in the spring of 2021. Once an officer is hired as a recruit, they undergo 6 months of basic training before they can even fulfill one of the elements of a public safety officer, which is law enforcement officer. They go to a 6-month or a 14-week certified police academy. Then they come here and they spend anywhere between 12 and 14 weeks with a certified field training officer here in Glencoe to apply their academy training to working on the street in Glencoe and to learn the Glencoe policies and procedures and how we conduct our business every day. In addition to that, to be considered a certified, fully cross-trained public safety officer in Glencoe, they also need to complete a 9-week fire academy and a 6-week EMT basic training academy. So when all is said and done, over their first 2 years on the job, which is their probationary period, they spend at least 10 months in training. As you can tell, our focus is training because of the different aspects of the services that we provide. The backbone of our training is our daily training. It's our in-service training. It includes policy review and legal updates to refresh or attain new knowledge and skills. In addition, the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board has mandates for training specific to fair and equal treatment of others, especially regarding the use of force. These trainings include civil rights, constitution and proper use of law enforcement authority, cultural competency, human rights, procedural justice, use of force, mental health awareness, and law updates. These topics are part of our continuous and recurring daily and monthly training elements and are also part of the daily training bulletins from Lexipol, who's our policy vendor. Specialized training is normally conducted by outside vendors, and that's for officers with specialized assignments within the department, or if they're attached to specialized task forces for complex responses requiring expertise and specialized training. The upside for the department is these officers receive this training, they serve on task forces, and they bring those skills back to Glencoe to share with other officers, train other officers, and just enhance our ability to respond to complex incidents in-house whenever possible. Last year in 2019, our officers averaged 265 hours of training each, which is more than 6 weeks of training throughout the year. This is much more training than local police officers or firefighters due to our cross-training model that we have here in Glencoe. We do not train once and move on. We have daily and monthly training to keep skills fresh and reinforce high-risk liability areas, especially use of force. Our policies in general cover all aspects of our activities, specifically in law enforcement regarding officer accountability and personnel management. Between 1994 and 2016, the department was accredited through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. That agency validates policies versus national standards. In 2016, we discontinued that because we were in the middle of extensive supervisory turnover and we couldn't commit the time to do it, but we did keep the CLIA policies in place. Then in 2018, we contracted with Lexipol to update and validate our policies to ensure they complied with existing case law, training mandates, and industry best practices. Lexipol is a nationally recognized vendor, and they use legal experts and just people who are experts in the law enforcement field to formulate policies specific to each customer that they have. Lexipol reviews and updates policies constantly. They provide daily training bulletins every day to our officers to reinforce those policies, especially regarding use of force. Per Illinois law, officers are justified to use force to effect an arrest or defend themselves or others from bodily harm. Of course, this must be in compliance within the limitations outlined in the law, as well as our department policy. Police use of force is a high risk and high liability aspect of policing. All of our use of force policies recognize and respect the value of human life without prejudice and are consistent with current law enforcement reform movements, such as the 8 Can't Wait initiatives. Our policies limit officers to use only an amount of force necessary to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement purpose. They prohibit chokeholds unless deadly force is justified. In fact, that's been in Illinois law since 2015. Our policies provide de-escalation strategies and training. Our policies require verbal warnings prior to the use of deadly force whenever feasible. We require officers to intercede and report unreasonable or unlawful use of force by fellow officers. We prohibit shooting at moving vehicles unless there's an imminent threat to life. And we require a comprehensive reporting and supervisory review to ensure law and policy compliance. Fortunately, Glencoe officers rarely find the need to use force. Most often it's during arrest situation when we face resistance or during mental health crisis. In Glencoe, since all of our officers are either a paramedic or an EMT, they get specialized training, which creates a heightened awareness for mental health situations that we find ourselves in very often. We're fortunate to partner also with Family Service at Glencoe for mental health crisis response, as well as training. When we respond to a mental health crisis event, we treat it more as a medical issue than a criminal issue. We focus on the patient's well-being when we're dealing with those kind of incidents rather than with a criminal mindset of having to effect an arrest or gain control of the person immediately to stop the situation. For all of this, de-escalation is the key. De-escalation is a strategic slowdown of an incident to give officers time, distance, space, and flexibility during these dynamic situations. Strategies are incorporated into our daily training bulletins, monthly legal review, and use of force training. As part of some reform movements, larger agencies are now using mental health professionals to respond to mental health crisis rather than police officers. We've been doing something very similar to that for many years. We respond initially to the call, and we reach out to Family Service at Glencoe, and they have crisis social workers that respond to the scene with us to assist us with those kind of incidents. All of our use of force is reported immediately to a supervisor and documented in the report. Supervisors then review to ensure compliance with the law and our policies. In addition, there's an annual review of all use of force incidents by me as the director to identify trends and modify training, policy, or equipment changes that we might need. As I mentioned before, use of force is relatively rare. In all of our calls for service, use of force is used in 0.03% of those cases. When compared to our arrests, it's used in 2.5% of our arrests. And that's mostly due to resisting. This data indicates to me that Glencoe officers are successfully using communication skills and de-escalation techniques to diffuse and gain compliance. Over the last 5 years, all incidents were weaponless physical force, meaning all officers used was empty hand control to take people into custody or to stop them from harming themselves or others. No baton use, no OC spray, no taser deployment, and no firearms have been used. Our training will continue to reinforce de-escalation, an alternative to applying force to gain compliance. Lexipol will also continue to update and revise our policies as needed to remain current with laws and best practices. Our officers are expected to uphold high standards of performance and conduct. In fact, it's formalized in all of our policies. All complaints of misconduct or poor performance are accepted and investigated thoroughly. We interview the complainant, we interview any witnesses, we speak with our officers involved, and we also review the audio and video from our in-car camera systems to gain as much information as we can before we determine how to dispose of the case. Criminal behavior is referred to the Assistant State's Attorneys of Cook County, the Illinois State Police Task Force, or the Illinois State Police Integrity Unit, as well as local task forces, to make sure that we're transparent and impartial in those investigations. I will say in my 7 years here, none of our personnel complaints were in regard to criminal behavior on the part of our officers. If a complaint is sustained, penalties for the officers, depending on the severity of what they did, could include counseling, a warning, suspension without pay, or termination of employment. When an investigation is completed, the complainant is contacted and given the full disposition of the case. Again, citizen complaints are also very rare. We average less than 5 a year. When you compare that to our calls for service, again, the average is 0.03% of the time a citizen will complain. 20% of the complaints that we have are sustained, meaning that the officer did violate a policy. During those instances over the last 5 years, the officers either got a warning for their file, received remedial training, or were suspended as a component of their discipline. I want to stress that no use of force incidents have led to a complaint of excessive force against Glencoe officers over the last 5 years. In 2019, some of you might be aware the FBI created a voluntary national use of force database for all police departments. We're part of that protocol. However, none of our use of force incidents meet the reportable standards. Those standards revolve around use of force by an officer that results in a fatality or serious bodily injury, or if an officer fires a firearm in the direction or at a person. In conclusion, I just want to say that I'm proud of our officers and the work they do every day. They face and overcome adversity and come to work every day ready to serve the public, a public that often doesn't appreciate or understand their service and sacrifice. They don't do this job for accolades and recognition. They do it because they're dedicated to their chosen profession and to serving the community to the best of their ability. Public safety officers are involved on a daily basis in numerous and varied interactions, and when warranted, may be required to use reasonable force in carrying out their duties. The use of force by law enforcement officers is a matter of critical concern, both to the general public and the law enforcement community, especially in response to high-profile excessive force incidents and police reform initiatives throughout the country. If and when force must be used, it must be justified, reasonable, and in compliance with policy and law. Unlawful and excessive force is unacceptable and will not be tolerated in Glencoe. That concludes my report, and I'll be happy to entertain any questions anyone may have.
Do any of the trustees have any questions? Peter.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate all that you've said. A few comments. One is, in light of today's situation, I would just suggest that we be prepared to answer questions about the training of our public safety. It seems to be in the social consciousness, and I think it'll be important that we have strong messages. I'm very confident, Chief, that you've got good answers, but let's be prepared on how we share them. The other thing I'll say, sort of a question, I think one of the beauties of the model that you manage is it develops a relationship with the community, more so than if we had a more traditional model. And my concern or a question for you is that relationship at the moment being stressed? And is this, if so, is this affecting morale of your team? I really think this relationship is important to foster. And a sort of follow-on question is, do you think we need to do more to have, to advance that relationship between your staff and residents?
Well, we're trying to do just that. However, this pandemic is reducing some of our normal interactions that we would have. I will say that the officers, they're paying attention to what's going on nationally. We talk about it daily at roll calls, and I believe the officers are, they're down just because they're seeing what's going on in the greater community, but I do think that they feel and they hear from our community members as they're on patrol, walking through downtown. And I think they understand that our community is very supportive of what we do. But like I've said before, we need to continue to build that trust. And that is by interacting with the community in positive efforts as much as we possibly can. And like I said, the pandemic has limited some of that, but we're hoping that we can continue doing the things that we normally would do to interact as best we can.
I would mention.
I have a quick question. It's really quick. Have there been any that you could report any specific incidents in our town where there's been, say, comments recently or any ill will displayed towards our local police force?
No, none at all. Not that I've heard from any of our officers, other than, some of the negative talking that was going on downtown. There's been no verbal comments by anybody, any of my officers that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
I would mention when we were being reaccredited the last time by the national organization, we had a group of police officials from across the country that were here conducting their investigation and verification, et cetera. And in my conversations with them, one of the things that I found striking is they told me that they had not observed any police department anywhere in the United States that had the relationship with the local community that our department has. And they were very surprised, and they told me that they had come to believe, even though they hadn't originally thought it was possible, that the nature of our model, with officers being paramedics and firemen as well as police officers, changed dramatically the nature of their relationship with the local community for the best, and was a very positive aspect and something that they hadn't observed elsewhere. I would just give you that comment. And that speaks to the level at which our officers work with the community and reach out and do things with our residents that cause our residents to think of them differently than you would think of how somebody might look at an officer in Chicago or elsewhere. Other questions or thoughts?
If there are no further questions, just a couple of things I wanted to add. And first of all, start with my gratitude to Director Lewandowski. He and I have, we have a shared tenure here with the village. Carrie started about 3 months before I did. And we've had the opportunity to kind of grow into our positions together. One thing I think is important to note for the benefit not only of the board members that are listening tonight, but also anyone else out there, our community is in incredibly sound hands with Director Lewandowski's leadership, with the leadership of his deputy chiefs and our lieutenants, and in the service provided by our sworn officers and others in the public safety department. We really do have an unusual circumstance in Glencoe, and one that was brought to us with tremendous foresight back in 1954 when the public safety model was conceived and developed. And I really frankly believe that it is serving our community in a way that none of our neighboring communities have the ability to. Sometimes it does sound like we pat ourselves on the back because we do things well here, and we do. In this particular circumstance, I really do think we stand out from the crowd, and it's worth making that statement. I'm very grateful to Chief Lewandowski for his leadership, particularly in these last several weeks that have been difficult. We talk on a pretty regular basis, and I appreciate the fact that he seldom minces his words as we talk through issues and work out solutions. It's important also, I think, to underscore that he's an open-minded chief who is working with our community, talking to individuals openly and honestly about the issues that they're facing, as well as the issues that our officers are facing. And I think it's serving us incredibly well as we embark upon the work that the Community Relations Forum is going to be working through in the coming months, and as well as fostering a dialogue in our community about these concerns and these issues. And I think it's important for all of us to be reminded of that. And I just underscore my gratitude to the chief for the work that he's doing on our behalf here in Glencoe. One thing I wanted to make mention of also, and Carrie, before I let you off the hook, have you perhaps comment on, we did include some of our service data in the board packet this month. And one item that didn't make it in because it's run through date specific timeframes was an incident that took place on July 2nd. And that was an attempted carjacking here in Glencoe at the Glencoe Golf Club. I'm very grateful, of course, that that no one was hurt in the situation, but certainly it was a situation that was frightening to not only those directly involved, but others in the community who were concerned about what it meant and what our response was. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for Director Lewandowski to just provide a brief update to the board, and therefore through that to the community on the investigation and the work that is still underway with respect to that particular incident.
Sure, of course, this is an ongoing investigation. As we reported earlier, we did arrest one of the 3 offenders on the day of the offense. Our investigators have been working with detectives from many other jurisdictions as far south as Burbank, as far north as Waukegan, including Chicago, to try to identify the other 2 offenders. This crime fits the pattern of our auto thieves that have been targeting Glencoe and many of our neighbors for a number of years now. It's loosely affiliated with the Southside gang members that are perpetrating those crimes here. In fact, in this instance, the 3 offenders had arrived in Glencoe because while they were driving on the expressway, they blew out a vehicle on a car that they had carjacked in a south suburb the day before. So they pulled off the roadway into Glencoe, abandoned that car, and went looking for another car to hijack and drive home up north, which is where they come from in Lake County. Thankfully, the victim in this case was not injured in any way. These offenders were armed with a handgun. They threatened her with it, tried to take her car. Luckily, she had her keys in her pocket. They actually did get inside of her car. They couldn't start it, so they fled out of panic. And luckily, we were able to catch one of them. So this element is in Glencoe, whether it's in the middle of the night or during the day. They're armed, they're violent. And again, this is all tied to a constant theme that we've been trying to register with our residents, that a lot of this started because in Glencoe and other suburbs near us, people leave their cars unlocked with the keys in them. So that's what attracted these types of offenders, and they're just continuing and getting more bold, and they're doing other crimes in broad daylight. So please, keep that in mind. Please secure your property, protect yourselves, be aware of your surroundings, and if you see anything suspicious, please call 911. That's what we're here for, and that's what we're trained to do. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. And just as another note relative to that, we did have a large presence of law enforcement that day on the west side of town in particular, along the Forest Preserve bike trails in the Skokie Lagoons. We were supported by the Winnetka, Northfield, and Northbrook police departments, as well as the county sheriff's office. But our officers were on scene talking to residents as the investigation was underway, and working to not only seek to find the offenders, but also to offer some reassurance to our residents that we were working on their behalf that day. So certainly a scary event and something that we don't ever expect, but I do want to underscore Director Lewandowski's point, and we have been reminding residents now for many years to lock cars, take the keys home with you, or into your home with you, and if you're going to leave your vehicle outdoors, especially, though there are instances even where unlocked garages have been entered and vehicles removed. So it is worth being vigilant, and we do want to underscore that message, and we'll continue to underscore that message with our communication tools at our disposal. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
I have just a few other items as well that I'd like to report out on this evening. When I spoke to the board last month, we had not gotten to this point, but the Village Hall did reopen to the public with reduced hours back on Monday, June 29th. Every day we've had several visitors to the building, never an overwhelming crowd, but certainly some folks who are stopping in to conduct business with the village. We're continuing to encourage residents and others to utilize our online and remote services whenever it's possible to save a trip to Village Hall. We are repeating this fairly frequently, that the pandemic shutdown really taught us that nearly everything you can do here, you can do over the phone or on the village's website. And so we are encouraging that. If you walk into the Village Hall, it will look a little bit different. There's markings on the floors reminding folks where to stand, and there are also some modifications that were made to some of our customer service windows to accommodate safety and for both our staff as well as those who are doing business here. Staff is wearing masks, and we're reminding all those who seek to do business in the building that we need you to wear a mask as well. And I'm always pleased to see that folks are complying with that. Just one other wanted to take 1 minute and again express my gratitude to the village board for your leadership and support in the steps taken back in March to close the village hall and to support the health and well-being not only of our community but also of the staff. It is something that has been repeated among our team, to me and to others in our leadership team, the gratitude that folks were given the ability to work from home. It is not something that they took for granted, and I've mentioned before, really impressed with the work that our team was able to do in really unexpected circumstances, and to keep the wheels of progress moving here at the village and to continue to serve our residents. Gratitude also extends though to the team for the work that they did in that time frame. It really was an honor to watch and to experience the efforts that they undertook. So just it's nice to be back. We are on a rotating schedule. Not everyone is here 100% of the time. Most of our department staff outside of public safety and our maintenance operators and public works are on a rotation so that we limit the size of the group of staff within the village hall. But we are meeting our service expectations from our residents, and we'll continue to adjust as necessary as we move through this in the next several months. As I sit here in the village hall, one message that I want to underscore and remind folks in our community about is this thing that I'm wearing on my face. The village is commencing a public service announcement effort that is entitled "It's Not Too Much to Mask." You may have seen some of our social media already with Chief Lewandowski pictured wearing his face covering. This is an effort to continue to remind members of our community, as we have over the last several months, of the state's requirements and recommendations on where and when to wear face coverings. Obviously, it's when you're indoors, when you can't keep 6 feet of distance between you and others. The finance director Larson and I are both sitting in the boardroom right now, and while we have more than 6 feet between us, we're still both masked, and that is considered a best practice and a step that we encourage our community to continue to take action to stay safe themselves, but also to be conscious of others who have perhaps unseen issues that they're concerned with, unseen personal health issues or family health issues that they are trying to protect either themselves or others from. And so I do encourage and will continue to encourage our community to mask up whenever you're out and about in town. All of our businesses have signage from the village that is encouraging that action. We'll continue to share that with them as they need it. And I do see a lot of folks in town who have taken masking very seriously. I do see some that unfortunately probably don't take it as seriously as we'd like to see, and there's always room for improvement. So we are working to increase awareness of that. Coming up next week, something we've been working on for literally months, now well over a year, in discussions with the Historical Society, the Park District, property owner at 239 Franklin, neighbors of that property, and neighbors of Park District property, along with our team here. We are planning to see the Sherman Booth Cottage, which is again located at 239 Franklin. It will be moving from its current location to its new home about a block to the south at Park 7N, which is a triangular park at the intersection of Maple Hill and Old Green Bay Road, at the mouth of our last northern stretch of the Green Bay Trail. There's an extensive document that's on the village's website that was assembled by the Historical Society. I'm not going to go over all the details of it, but the one thing I did want to note was that the move will begin at around 8 a.m. on Tuesday, the 21st. Public Safety and Public Works are going to be assisting with that effort. There's going to be a rolling lane closure, road closure, while the house moves from its current location to the park site. We expect that's going to take about an hour, perhaps a few minutes longer, but it's a pretty short jaunt from where it's currently sitting to where it will be sitting. Given the fact that there are some road closures on Sheridan Road, this may impact those homeowners who live in that immediate vicinity. And we want to make sure that folks have that information. We will probably be pushing out additional information through our reverse 911 system to remind them of that potential inconvenience that morning. But as I said, it should be a short inconvenience and something actually that probably is going to be a sight to behold. It's not something that happens every day when you see a house rolling down the street, but it is up on its structure that will accommodate that safe travel, sitting on the property right now and getting ready to move on Tuesday. So that has been an effort that has really encompassed the entire village. It's a very Glencoe effort and something that I think we will all be proud of as we move through this. So something to look forward to next week. Another big project that we have on the horizon is our water meter replacement project. I've asked our management analyst, Megan Olson, to provide a brief overview of what folks can start to expect seeing in the next 4 or so weeks in terms of communication from the village and the work that we've been undertaking. And so I'm going to hand the podium over to Megan.
Thank you. The water meter infrastructure replacement program is ramping up. At the beginning of July, staff met with Core & Main and their subcontractor, United Meters, for the pre-construction meeting to finalize the logistics of the project, including health and safety precautions in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Another subcontractor, Wave Communications, is finalizing the installation of the collector stations this week. The collector stations will receive water usage readings from the meter transmitter and send them to the water utility software. This will be followed by the installation of 27 test meters located strategically around the village to ensure that the transmitters will communicate with the collector stations. Finance and Public Works are currently working with our meter and ERP vendors to convert all water meter accounts from Enterprise to Encode. This includes the transfer of water meter reading and billing in the first week of August. The water meter changeout appointments are anticipated to start at the end of August. The village-wide meter changeout will be divided into 3 phases, roughly mirroring the current meter reading routes. Residents in the first phase will begin receiving letters in mid-August requesting them to schedule their meter replacement appointments. Regarding communications about the project to the residents, the village webpage on the water meter project has been live for the past couple of months, and the village manager's office continues to educate the community weekly through social media and e-news blast. The village also recently engaged a media consultant to assist with communications about the project to residents and businesses. As a part of this contract, a short video will be produced chronicling the water meter replacement appointment. United Meters, the meter installer, has agreed to assist with the video production. Additionally, the consultant will assist with a 2-page flyer detailing the water meter changeout appointment. In mid-August, this flyer will be mailed to every resident in the village and will detail the importance of the water meter replacement project in the context of other water utility improvements, and the details of the water meter appointments, including the health and safety precautions that will be taken by the installer. That's all I have. Are there any questions?
Any questions from any of the trustees?
If there are, and as they come up through the course of this project, Megan is going to be our staff point person, assisted obviously by others in the Public Works Department, but she is quickly learning that this game of Tinker Toys that has been placed on her desk is going to be something to behold once we get started with it. Lots happening in the background right now, and as we work toward the public facing part of this project, we do want to underscore how important it is to us that information that is easy to understand and readily available is part of this project. My understanding, I've been told that this video that Megan referenced that's being done to kind of spotlight how a meter is changed, what sort of interactions take place between the homeowner and the meter replacement staff is taking place at my home. And I will be part of the furniture, I hope, and not part of the acting talent, but definitely an opportunity for me to see firsthand, well before we engage on this effort with the rest of our community, what it's going to feel like, what it'll look like as I welcome this individual and a filming crew as well into my home, and watch how this project will be undertaken once it begins. So we certainly will be sharing more information with the board and with the community as we roll through this in the coming weeks and months.
I'm sure the board will look forward to metering how Megan is doing.
Yes, they sure will. Last thing I wanted to make mention of is that as we've all been talking about for a while, our vehicle sticker program, the due date was delayed by about 2 months owing to the COVID-19 pandemic and the issues that provided for some of our residents, both from a financial standpoint and just from a getting out and doing certain chores and errands standpoint. We are still seeing a significant reduction in those renewals this year. We're still about 20%, a little over 20% of our total annual vehicle sticker sales that have not taken place at this point. Bad news about that is that there is a late fee that is applied to those that are coming in to renew now. The good news is we'll smile and welcome you into the Village Hall if you choose to stop by and pick up the sticker in person. The other part of the bad news is you won't be able to see us smile because we're all going to have masks on. But we do encourage and remind the community that it's important to get those renewals done. And we always encourage people to do it early and utilize our website, which you still can do today if you so choose. Last and not least, since we met last, the 4th of July took place. And the 4th of July 2020 was a very different 4th of July than what this community is used to. One thing that we did, I think, have some success with in terms of trying to celebrate our 4th of July this year was a very short, about 10 vehicle parade of our public safety, public works, and park district vehicles that paraded through 16 miles of Glencoe streets on the 4th of July over about a 2-hour period of time. Lots of smiling and waving as folks stepped out onto their front lawns and saw our team. It was a nice way to celebrate the holiday in a really changed environment. One of the things I said was, as much as I enjoyed it, I'm really looking forward to what 2021 will bring us. And my hope is that it's a opportunity for more togetherness as a community on really what is our favorite holiday as a town. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, but I've taken up a lot of your time this evening with a lot of information. So I will leave it to you as to whether you have questions in addition.
Any questions? I did want to say one thing. Oh, aha, Peter, go ahead.
Just kidding, just kidding.
I did want to say one thing, and relating to Phil's earlier comment and to the outstanding job that Director Lewandowski did in telling us about what our policies and things are. Director Lewandowski and Phil joined us very close together, really as a key team to reevaluate every aspect of what we do in public safety and in the rest of the village, and to make sure that we brought everything into the modern world and with the top level of service and customer-centric approach. If you look at how well we have done as a village in terms of public safety, both the level and what we do to maintain our officers and our approach, our relationship to the community, and the job that our public safety does in protecting and serving all of our residents, whether it's medical, fire, or police. And if you look at the job that the village has done through this pandemic, where we had to close down the village hall, and yet we performed and have managed to provide the services and communicate with our residents and do things far in excess of what any of the surrounding villages have achieved in terms of their service during this period. It is a true illustration, and on behalf of the board, I want to thank both of them, of what the importance is and what we can achieve when we have outstanding leadership of the level that Chief Lewandowski and Village Manager Corrali bring to Glencoe. And the encouragement and the level of staff that we see, for example, just tonight on the various reports and things we get. We are very fortunate, and I wish to thank them and all of the members of their staffs and all the people that work for our village for the tremendous efforts and outstanding job they've done through this pandemic and in bringing the village to the level that we're at. That said, let me return to normal.
I just want to second that.
Thank you, Barbara. The next order of business, and this is not an emergency that was caused by Phil. The next order of business is that, as you know, each time as we have one of these meetings, our current declaration of a state of emergency comes up or expires at the end of our meeting. And so one of the first things that we always have to do as part of my part in this is to get a motion to approve the extension until the adjournment of the next regular, special, or emergency meeting of the Board of Trustees of our declaration of emergency. May I have a motion to do that, please?
Mulvaney.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Trustee Hallwax.
Yes.
Trustee Listener.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Thank you. Our next regular village board meeting is currently scheduled for Thursday, August 20th, 2020. So I just want to mention that. And the good news is you don't have to spend a lot of time listening to me tonight, because that's all I have in my report. Our next order of business is the consent agenda. And since this was a virtual meeting, let me ask Phil to please read us the titles of all the things that are on the consent agenda for our review this evening.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first item is the June 2020 Village Treasurer's Report and Glencoe Golf Club Financial Report. The June 2020 check register for the Village of Glencoe and Glencoe Golf Club. The ratification of the June 2020 early check register list. consideration of a resolution approving a village manager employment agreement with myself, Philip A. Corrali. And last, consideration of a resolution approving and making available for release certain closed session minutes of the Glencoe Board of Trustees.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to anything on the consent agenda? If not, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, Mulvaney.
Second.
Thank you. Phil, may I have a roll call?
Trustee Hallwax,
Yes.
Trustee Listener,
Yes.
Trustee Miller,
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney, Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
Okay. Our next order of business is consideration of an ordinance disconnecting certain territory from the village of Glencoe, subject to annexation to the village of Winnetka, pursuant to section 7-124 of the Illinois Municipal Code, and this relates to 1405 Scott Avenue, Winnetka, Illinois. May I have Development Services Manager Taylor Baxter explain to us what this is about?
Thank you, Mr. President. The item before you tonight is an ordinance for a proposed plat of disconnection from Glencoe at 1405 Scott Avenue for annexation into the village of Winnetka. And this is one of 11 remaining lots on Scott Avenue that are split lots, partially in Glencoe to the north and Winnetka to the south. And this disconnection was proposed by the property owner earlier this year in the spring. And the plat of disconnection and the disconnection ordinance that goes along with it have been reviewed by the village attorney's office and also by the village of Winnetka. This property is at the northwest corner of Scott Avenue and Vernon Avenue. The boundary between Glencoe and Winnetka runs east to west through the front half of this property. And the ordinance for disconnection is pursuant to the Illinois Municipal Code, as mentioned earlier, and also to a 2018 intergovernmental agreement that was made between Winnetka and Glencoe that sets forth the process for how these disconnection and annexation would take place. This agreement sets up this process. After the petition for disconnection and annexation is received, Glencoe approves the disconnection. That would be what we would be hearing tonight. And then Winnetka approves annexation after Glencoe approves the disconnection. If the village board approves this disconnection ordinance tonight, Winnetka has a hearing for annexation tentatively set for August. After the property moves entirely into Winnetka, Glencoe is entitled to 5 de-escalating property tax reimbursement payments from the village of Winnetka over a 5-year period. The first one would be for 100% and would go down by 20% each year for the next 5 years. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Any questions or comments? Let me go through you one at a time just to make sure. Joe?
No questions or comments.
Gail?
No questions or comments.
Barbara?
None for me.
Gary?
None. Thank you.
Peter, the famous Peter. Any? If there are no questions or comments, may I have a motion to approve?
Mulvaney.
Second.
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Hallwax,
Yes.
Trustee Listener,
Yes.
Trustee Miller,
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney,
Yes.
Rubin.
Yes.
Okay. Management Analyst Lester, are there any public comments that were received during the meeting?
President Levin, we did not receive any additional public comment.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, yeah, so moved.
Second.
May I have a roll call?
Trustee Hallwax,
Yes.
Trustee Listener,
Yes.
Trustee Miller,
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney. Trustee Rubin.
Yes.
We're adjourned.
We're adjourned. We survived. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Hey, is Steve still on the line?
I am.
Thanks,
Steve,
everyone. Be safe.
Are you hearing anything about us going back to phase 3?
I've not.
I've got a couple of different teacher principal friends that have been saying they're trying to open the schools and there's a chance that Illinois moves back. I just didn't.
I mean, it's the threat is out there, but I've not heard anything real. I've heard the governor and the mayor and Mayor Lightfoot have met today to just put in stronger standards to prevent anything like that, but I've not heard it yet.
And none of our associates, the things which we hear from on almost a daily basis of what's new, have indicated anything such as that. So as far as I know, there's no current thought of.
Well said.
Good night, everybody.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.